Chapter the 7th, Book the 2nd of Little Dorrit. Read for LibriVox.org by Alice Christoph. Little Dorrit by Charles Dickens. Book the 2nd. Chapter the 7th. Mostly prunes and prism. Mrs. General, always on her coach-box keeping the proprieties well together, took pains to form a surface on her very dear young friend, and Mrs. General's very dear young friend tried hard to receive it. Hard as she had tried in her laborious life to attain many ends, she had never tried harder than she did now to be varnished by Mrs. General. It made her anxious and ill at ease to be operated upon by that smoothing hand, it is true, but she submitted herself to the family want in its greatness, as she had submitted herself to the family want in its littleness, and yielded to her own inclinations in this thing no more than she had yielded to her hunger itself, in the days when she had saved her dinner that her father might have his supper. One comfort that she had under the ordeal by General was more sustaining to her, and made her more grateful than to a less devoted and affectionate spirit, not habituated to her struggles and sacrifices, might appear quite reasonable. And indeed, it may often be observed in life that spirits like Little Dorrit do not appear to reason half as carefully as the folks who get the better of them. The continued kindness of her sister was this comfort to Little Dorrit. It was nothing to her that the kindness took the form of tolerant patronage. She was used to that. It was nothing to her that it kept her in a tributary position, and showed her in attendance on the flaming car in which Miss Fanny sat on an elevated seat, exacting homage. She sought no better place, always admiring Fanny's beauty and grace and readiness, and not now asking herself how much of her disposition to be strongly attached to Fanny was due to her own heart, and how much to Fanny's. She gave her all the sisterly fondness her great heart contained. The wholesale amount of prunes and prism which Mrs. General infused into the family life, combined with the perpetual plunges made by Fanny into society, left but a very small residue of any natural deposit at the bottom of the mixture. This rendered confidences with Fanny doubly precious to Little Dorrit, and heightened the relief they afforded her. "Amy," said Fanny to her one night when they were alone, after a day so tiring that Little Dorrit was quite worn out, though Fanny would have taken another dip into society with the greatest pleasure in life, "I'm going to put something into your little head. You won't guess what it is, I suspect?" "I don't think that's likely, dear," said Little Dorrit. "Come, I'll give you a clue, child," said Fanny. "Mrs. General." Prunes and prism, in 1,000 combinations, having been wearily in the ascendant all day, everything having been surface and varnish and show without substance, Little Dorrit looked as if she had hoped that Mrs. General was safely tucked up in bed for some hours. "Now can you guess, Amy?" said Fanny. "No, dear, unless I have done anything," said Little Dorrit, rather alarmed, and meaning anything calculated to crack varnish and ruffle surface. Fanny was so very much amused by the misgiving that she took up her favourite fan, being then seated at her dressing-table with her armoury of cruel instruments about her, most of them reeking from the heart of Sparkler, and tapped her sister frequently on the nose with it, laughing all the time. "Oh, our Amy, said Fanny. "What a timid little goose our Amy is! But this is nothing to laugh at. On the contrary, I am very cross, my dear." "As it is not with me, Fanny, I don't mind," returned her sister, smiling. "Ah, but I do mind," said Fanny, "and so will you, pet, when I enlighten you. Amy, has it never struck you that somebody is monstrously polite to Mrs. General?" "Everybody is polite to Mrs. General," said Little Dorrit, because she freezes them into it," interrupted Fanny. "I don't mean that. Quite different from that. Come, has it never struck you, Amy, that Pa is monstrously polite to Mrs. General?" Amy, murmuring no, looked quite confounded. "No, I dare say not, but he is," said Fanny. "He is, Amy, and remember my words. Mrs. General has designs on Pa." "Dear Fanny, do you think it possible that Mrs. General has designs on any one?" "Do I think it possible?" retorted Fanny. "My love, I know it. I tell you she has designs on Pa, and more than that, I tell you Pa considers her such a wonder, such a paragon of accomplishment, and such an acquisition to our family, that he is ready to get himself into a state of perfect infatuation with her at any moment, and that opens a pretty picture of things, I hope. Think of me with Mrs. General for a mamma!" Little Dorrit did not reply. "Think of me with Mrs. General for a mamma!" But she looked anxious, and seriously inquired what had led Fanny to these conclusions. "Lord, my darling," said Fanny tartly, "you might as well ask me how I know when a man is struck with myself. But of course I do know. It happens pretty often, but I always know it. I know this in much the same way, I suppose. At all events, I know it." "You never heard Papa say anything?" "Say anything?" repeated Fanny. "My dearest, darling child, what necessity has he had yet a while to say anything?" "And you have never heard Mrs. General say anything?" "My goodness me, Amy!" returned Fanny. "Is she the sort of woman to say anything? Isn't it perfectly plain and clear that she has nothing to do at present but to hold herself upright, keep her aggravating gloves on, and go sweeping about? Say anything! If she had the ace of trumps in her hand at whilst, she wouldn't say anything, child. It would come out when she played it." "At least, you may be mistaken, Fanny. Now may you not?" "Oh yes, I may be," said Fanny, "but I am not. However, I am glad you can contemplate such an escape, my dear, and I am glad that you can take this for the present with sufficient coolness to think of such a chance. It makes me hope that you may be able to bear the connection." "I should not be able to bear it, and I should not try. I'd marry young Sparkler first." "Oh, you would never marry him, Fanny, under any circumstances." "Upon my word, my dear," rejoined that young lady with exceeding indifference, "I wouldn't positively answer even for that. There is no knowing what might happen, especially as I should have many opportunities afterwards of treating that woman his mother in her own style, which I most decidedly should not be slow to avail myself of, Amy." No more passed between the sisters then, but what had passed gave the two subjects of Mrs. General and Mr. Sparkler great prominence in little Dorrit's mind, and thenceforth she thought very much of both. Mrs. General, having long ago formed her own surface to such perfection that it hid whatever was below it, if anything, no observation was to be made in that quarter. Mr. Dorrit was undeniably very polite to her, and had a high opinion of her, but Fanny, impetuous at most times, might easily be wrong for all that. Whereas the Sparkler question was on the different footing that any one could see what was going on there, and little Dorrit saw it and pondered on it with many doubts and wonderings. The devotion of Mr. Sparkler was only to be equalled by the caprice and cruelty of his enslaver. Sometimes she would prefer him to such distinction of notice that he would chuckle aloud with joy. Next day, or next hour, she would overlook him so completely, and drop him into such an abyss of obscurity, that he would groan under a weak pretence of coughing. The constancy of his attendance never touched Fanny, though he was so inseparable from Edward, that, when that gentleman wished for a change of society, he was under the irksome necessity of gliding out like a conspirator in disguised boats and by secret doors and back ways, though he was so solicitous to know how Mr. Dorrit was, that he called every other day to inquire, as if Mr. Dorrit were the prey of an intermittent fever, though he was so constantly being paddled up and down before the principal windows, that he might have been supposed to have made a wager for a large stake to be paddled 1,000 miles in 1,000 hours, though whenever the gondola of his mistress left the gate, the gondola of Mr. Sparkler shot out from some watery ambush and gave chase, as if she were a fair smuggler, and he a custom-house officer. It was probably owing to this fortification of the natural strength of his constitution with so much exposure to the air and the salt sea, that Mr. Sparkler did not pine outwardly. But whatever the cause, he was so far from having any prospect of moving his mistress by a languishing state of health, that he grew bluffer every day, and that peculiarity in his appearance of seeming rather a swelled boy than a young man became developed to an extraordinary degree of ruddy puffiness. Blandois calling to pay his respects, Mr. Dorrit received him with affability as the friend of Mr. Gowan, and mentioned to him his idea of commissioning Mr. Gowan to transmit him to posterity. Blandois highly extolling it, it occurred to Mr. Dorrit that it might be agreeable to Blandois to communicate to his friend the great opportunity reserved for him. Blandois accepted the commission with his own free elegance of manner, and swore he would discharge it before he was an hour older. On his imparting the news to Gowan, that master gave Mr. Dorrit to the devil with great liberality some round dozen of times, for he resented patronage almost as much as he resented the want of it, and was inclined to quarrel with his friend for bringing him the message. "It may be a defect in my mental vision, Blandois," said he, "but may I die if I see what you have to do with this." "Death of my life," replied Blandois, "nor I neither, except that I thought I was serving my friend." "By putting an upstart's hair in his pocket?" said Gowan, frowning. "Do you mean that? Tell your other friend to get his head painted for the sign of some public house, and to get it done by a sign painter. Who am I, and who is he?" "Professore," returned the ambassador. "And who is Blandois?" Without appearing at all interested in the latter question, Gowan angrily whistled Mr. Dorrit away. But next day he resumed the subject by saying in his off-hand manner, and with a slighting laugh, "Well, Blandois, when shall we go to this Maecenas of yours? We journeymen must take jobs when we can get them. When shall we go and look after this job?" "When you will," said the injured Blandois. "As you please. What have I to do with it? What is it to me?" "I can tell you what it is to me," said Gowan. "Bread and cheese. One must eat. So come along, my Blandois." Mr. Dorrit received them in the presence of his daughters and of Mr. Sparkler, who happened by some surprising accident to be calling there. "How are you, Sparkler?" said Gowan carelessly. "When you have to live by your mother, wit, old boy, I hope you may get on better than I do." Mr. Dorrit then mentioned his proposal. "Sir," said Gowan, laughing after receiving it gracefully enough, "I am new to the trade, and not expert at its mysteries. I believe I ought to look at you in various lights, tell you are a capital subject, and consider when I shall be sufficiently disengaged to devote myself with the necessary enthusiasm to the fine picture I mean to make of you. I assure you," and he laughed again, "I feel quite a traitor in the camp of those dear, gifted, good, noble fellows, my brother artists, by not doing the hocus-pocus better. But I have not been brought up to it, and it's too late to learn it. Now the fact is, I am a very bad painter, but not much worse than the generality. If you are going to throw away 100 guineas or so, I am as poor as a poor relation of great people usually is, and I shall be very much obliged to you if you'll throw them away upon me. I'll do the best I can for the money, and if the best should be bad, why, even then, you may probably have a bad picture with a small name to it, instead of a bad picture with a large name to it." This tone, though not what he had expected, on the whole suited Mr. Dorrit remarkably well. It showed that the gentleman, highly connected and not a mere workman, would be under an obligation to him. He expressed his satisfaction in placing himself in Mr. Gowan's hands, and trusted that he would have the pleasure, in their characters of private gentlemen, of improving his acquaintance. "You are very good," said Gowan. "I have not forsworn society since I joined the Brotherhood of the Brush, the most delightful fellows on the face of the earth, and am glad enough to smell the old fine gunpowder now and then, though it did blow me into mid-air and my present calling. You'll not think, Mr. Dorrit," and here he laughed again in the easiest way, "that I am lapsing into the freemasonry of the craft, for it's not so. Upon my life, I can't help betraying it wherever I go, though, by Jupiter, I love and honour the craft with all my might. If I propose a stipulation as to time and place—" "Ha! Mr. Dorrit could erect no suspicion of that kind on Mr. Gowan's frankness." "Again, you are very good," said Gowan. "Mr. Dorrit, I hear you are going to Rome. I am going to Rome, having friends there. Let me begin to do you the injustice I have conspired to do you, there. not here. We shall all be harried during the rest of our stay here, and though there is not a poorer man with whole elbows in Venice than myself, I have not quite got all the amateur out of me yet, comprising the trade again, you see, and can't fall on to order in a hurry, for the mere sake of the sixpences." These remarks were not less favourably received by Mr. Dorrit than their predecessors. They were the prelude to the first reception of Mr. and Mrs. Gowan at dinner, and they skilfully placed Gowan on his usual ground in the new family. His wife, too, they placed on her usual ground. Miss Fanny understood, with particular distinctness, that Mrs. Gowan's good looks had cost her husband very dear, that there had been a great disturbance about her in the Barnacle family, and that the dowager Mrs. Gowan, nearly heart-broken, had resolutely set her face against the marriage, until overpowered by her maternal feelings. Mrs. General likewise clearly understood that the attachment had occasioned much family grief and dissension. Of honest Mr. Meagles no mention was made, except that it was natural enough that a person of that sort should wish to raise his daughter out of his own obscurity, and that no one could blame him for trying his best to do so. Little Dorrit's interest in the fair subject of this easily accepted belief was too earnest and watchful to fail in accurate observation. She could see that it had its part in throwing upon Mrs. Gowan the touch of a shadow under which she lived, and she even had an instinctive knowledge that there was not the least truth in it. But it had an influence in placing obstacles in the way of her association with Mrs. Gowan, by making the Prunes and Prism School excessively polite to her, but not very intimate with her, and little Dorrit, as an enforced sizer of that college, was obliged to submit herself humbly to its ordinances. Nevertheless, there was a sympathetic understanding already established between the two, which would have carried them over greater difficulties, and made a friendship out of a more restricted intercourse. As though accidents were determined to be favourable to it, they had a new assurance of congeniality in the aversion which each perceived that the other felt towards Blandois of Paris, an aversion amounting to the repugnance and horror of a natural antipathy towards an odious creature of the reptile kind. And there was a passive congeniality between them, besides this active one. To both of them Blandois behaved in exactly the same manner, and to both of them his manner had uniformly something in it which they both knew to be different from his bearing towards others. The difference was too minute in its expression to be perceived by others, but they knew it to be there. A mere trick of his evil eyes, a mere turn of his smooth white hand, a mere hair's breadth of addition to the fall of his nose and the rise of the moustache in the most frequent movement of his face, conveyed to both of them, equally, a swagger personal to themselves. It was as if he had said, "I have a secret power in this quarter. I know what I know." This had never been felt by them both in so great a degree, and never by each so perfectly to the knowledge of the other, as on a day when he came to Mr. Dorrit's to take his leave before quitting Venice. Mrs. Gowan was herself there for the same purpose, and he came upon the two together, the rest of the family being out. The two had not been together 5 minutes, and the peculiar manner seemed to convey to them, "You are going to talk about me? Ha! Behold me here to prevent it." "Gowan is coming here?" said Blandois with a smile. Mrs. Gowan replied he was not coming. "Not coming?" said Blandois. "Permit your devoted servant, when you leave here, to escort you home." "Thank you, I am not going home." "Not going home?" said Blandois. "Then I am forlorn." That he might be, but he was not so forlorn as to roam away and leave them together. He sat entertaining them with his finest compliments and his choicest conversation, but he conveyed to them all the time, "No, no, no, dear ladies, behold me here expressly to prevent it." He conveyed it to them with so much meaning, and he had such a diabolical persistency in him, that at length Mrs. Gowan rose to depart. On his offering his hand to Mrs. Gowan to lead her down the staircase, She retained little Dorrit's hand in hers, with a cautious pressure, and said, "No, thank you. But if you will please to see if my boatman is there, I shall be obliged to you." It left him no choice but to go down before them. As he did so, hat in hand, Mrs. Gowan whispered, "He killed the dog. Does Mr. Gowan know it?" Little Dorrit whispered, "No one knows it. Don't look towards me. Look towards him. He will turn his face in a moment. No one knows it, but I am sure he did. You are?" I think so," Little Dorrit answered. "Henry likes him, and he will not think ill of him. He is so generous and open himself. But you and I feel sure that we think of him as he deserves. He argued with Henry that the dog had been already poisoned when he changed so, and sprang at him. Henry believes it, but we do not. I see he's listening, but can't hear. Goodbye, my love, goodbye." The last words were spoken aloud, as the vigilant Blandois stopped, turned his head, and looked at them from the bottom of the staircase. Assuredly he did look then, though he looked his politest, as if any real philanthropist could have desired no better employment than to lash a great stone to his neck, and drop him into the water flowing beyond the dark arched gateway in which he stood. No such benefactor to mankind being on the spot, he handed Mrs. Gowan to her boat, and stood there until it had shot out of the narrow view, when he handed himself into his own boat and followed. Little Dorrit had sometimes thought, and now thought again, as she retraced her steps up the staircase, that he had made his way too easily into her father's house. But so many and such varieties of people did the same, through Mr. Dorrit's participation in his elder daughter's society mania, that it was hardly an exceptional case. A perfect fury for making acquaintances on whom to impress their riches and importance had seized the house of Dorrit. It appeared on the whole, to little Dorrit herself, that this same society in which they lived greatly resembled a superior sort of Marshalsea. Numbers of people seemed to come abroad, pretty much as people had come into the prison, through debt, through idleness, relationship, curiosity, and general unfitness for getting on at home. They were brought into these foreign towns in the custody of couriers and local followers, just as the debtors had been brought into the prison. They prowled about the churches and picture galleries, much in the old, dreary, prison-yard manner. They were usually going away again tomorrow or next week, and rarely knew their own minds, and seldom did what they said they would do, or went where they said they would go. In all this again, very like the prison debtors. They paid high for poor accommodation, and disparaged a place while they pretended to like it, which was exactly the Marshalsea custom. They were envied when they went away by people left behind, feigning not to want to go, and that again was the Marshalsea habit invariably. A certain set of words and phrases, as much belonging to tourists as the college and the snuggery belonged to the jail, was always in their mouths. They had precisely the same incapacity for settling down to anything, as the prisoners used to have. They rather deteriorated one another, as the prisoners used to do, and they wore untidy dresses, and fell into a slouching way of life, still, always like the people in the Marshalsea. The period of the family's stay at Venice came, in its course, to an end, and they moved with their retinue to Rome. Through a repetition of the former Italian scenes, growing more dirty and more haggard as they went on, and bringing them at length to where the very air was diseased, they passed to their destination. A fine residence had been taken for them on the Corso, and there they took up their abode, in a city where everything seemed to be trying to stand still forever on the ruins of something else, except the water, which, following eternal laws, tumbled and rolled from its glorious multitude of fountains. Here it seemed to little Dorrit that a change came over the Marshalsea spirit of their society, and that prunes and prism got the upper hand. Everybody was walking about St. Peter's and the Vatican on somebody else's cork legs, and straining every visible object through somebody else's sieve. Nobody said what anything was, but everybody said what the Mrs. Generals, Mr. Eustace, or somebody else said it was. The whole body of travellers seemed to be a collection of voluntary human sacrifices, bound hand and foot, and delivered over to Mr. Eustace and his attendants, to have the entrails of their intellects arranged according to the taste of that sacred priesthood. Through the ragged remains of temples and tombs and palaces and senate halls and theatres and amphitheatres of ancient days, hosts of tongue-tied and blindfolded moderns were carefully feeling their way, incessantly repeating prunes and prism in the endeavour to set their lips according to the received form. Mrs. General was in her pure element. Nobody had an opinion. There was a formation of surface going on around her on an amazing scale, and it had not a flaw of courage or honest free speech in it. Another modification of prunes and prism insinuated itself on little Dorrit's notice very shortly after their arrival. They received an early visit from Mrs. Merdle, who led that extensive department of life in the Eternal City that winter, and the skilful manner in which she and Fanny fenced with one another on the occasion almost made her quiet sister wink, like the glittering of small swords. "So delighted," said Mrs. Merdle, "to resume an acquaintance so inauspiciously begun at Martigny." "At Martigny, of course," said Fanny. "Charmed, I am sure." "I understand," said Mrs. Merdle, "from my son Edmund Sparkler, that he has already improved that chance occasion. He has returned quite transported with Venice." "Indeed?" returned the careless Fanny. "Was he there long?" "I might refer that question to Mr. Dorrit," said Mrs. Merdle, turning the bosom towards that gentleman, "Edmund having been so much indebted to him for rendering his stay agreeable." "Oh, pray don't speak of it," returned Fanny. "I believe papa had the pleasure of inviting Mr. Sparkler twice or thrice, but it was nothing. We had so many people about us, and kept such open house, that if he had that pleasure, it was less than nothing."
"Except, my dear," said Mr. Dorrit, "except as it afforded me unusual gratification to show by any means, however slight and worthless, the high estimation in which, in common with the rest of the world, I hold so distinguished and princely a character as Mr. Merdle's." The bosom received this tribute in its most engaging manner. "Mr. Merdle," observed Fanny, as a means of dismissing Mr. Sparkler into the background, "is quite a theme of papa's, you must know, Mrs. Merdle." "I have been disappointed, madam," said Mr. Dorrit, "to understand from Mr. Sparkler that there is no great probability of Mr. Merdle's coming abroad."
"Why, indeed?" said Mrs. Merdle. "He is so much engaged, and is such request, that I fear not. He has not been able to get abroad for years. You, Miss Dorrit, I believe, have been almost continually abroad for a long time." "Oh dear, yes," drawled Fanny with the greatest hardihood. "An immense number of years." "So I should have inferred," said Mrs. Merdle. "Exactly," said Fanny.
"I trust, however," resumed Mr. Dorrit, "that if we have not the great advantage of becoming known to Mr. Merdle on this side of the Alps or Mediterranean, I shall have that honour on returning to England. It is an honour I particularly desire, and shall particularly esteem."
"Mr. Merdle," said Mrs. Merdle, who had been looking admiringly at Fanny through her eyeglass, "will esteem it, I am sure, no less." Little Dorrit, still habitually thoughtful and solitary, though no longer alone, at first supposed this to be mere prunes and prism; but as her father, when they had been to a brilliant reception at Mrs. Merdle's, harped at their own family breakfast-table on his wish to know Mr. Merdle, with the contingent view of benefiting by the advice of that wonderful man in the disposal of his fortune, she began to think it had a real meaning, and to entertain a curiosity on her own part to see the shining light of the time. End of chapter the 7th, book the 2nd. This recording is in the public domain. Chapter the 8th, book the 2nd of Little Dorrit. Read for LibriVox.org by Alice Christoph. Little Dorrit by Charles Dickens. Book the Second. Chapter the 8th. The Dowager Mrs. Gowan is reminded that it never does. While the waters of Venice and the ruins of Rome were sunning themselves for the pleasure of the Dorrit family, and were daily being sketched out of all earthly proportion, lineament, and likeness, by travelling pencils innumerable, the firm of Doyce and Clenham hammered away in Bleeding Heart Yard, and the vigorous clink of iron upon iron was heard there through the working hours. The younger partner had by this time brought the business into sound trim, and the elder, left free to follow his own ingenious devices, had done much to enhance the character of the factory. As an ingenious man, he had necessarily to encounter every discouragement that the ruling powers for a length of time had been able by any means to put in the way of this class of culprits. But that was only reasonable self-defence in the powers, since how to do it must obviously be regarded as the natural and mortal enemy of how not to do it. In this was to be found the basis of the wise system, by tooth and nail upheld by the Circumlocution Office, of warning every ingenious British subject to be ingenious at his peril, of harassing him, abstracting him, inviting robbers, by making his remedy uncertain and expensive, to plunder him, and at the best of confiscating his property after a short term of enjoyment, as though invention were on a par with felony. The system had uniformly found great favour with the Barnacles, and that was only reasonable too, for one who worthily invents must be in earnest, and the Barnacles abhorred and dreaded nothing half so much. That again was very reasonable, since in a country suffering under the affliction of a great amount of earnestness, there might, in an exceeding short space of time, be not a single barnacle left sticking to a post. Daniel Doyce faced his condition with its pains and penalties attached to it, and soberly worked on for the work's sake. Clenham, cheering him with a hearty cooperation, was a moral support to him, besides doing good service in his business relation. The concern prospered, and the partners were fast friends. But Daniel could not forget the old design of so many years. It was not in reason to be expected that he should. If he could have lightly forgotten it, he could never have conceived it, or had the patience and perseverance to work it out. So Clenham thought, when he sometimes observed him of an evening looking over the models and drawings, and consoling himself by muttering with a sigh, as he put them away again, that the thing was as true as it ever was. To show no sympathy with so much endeavour and so much disappointment would have been to fail in what Clenham regarded as among the implied obligations of his partnership. A revival of the passing interest in the subject, which had been by chance awakened at the door of the Circumlocution Office, originated in this feeling. He asked his partner to explain the invention to him. Having a lenient consideration, he stipulated, "For my being no workman, Doyce." "No workman?" said Doyce. "You would have been a thorough workman if you had given yourself to it. You have as good a head for understanding such things as I have met with." "A totally uneducated one, I am sorry to add," said Clenham. "I don't know that," returned Doyce, "and I wouldn't have you say that. No man of sense who has been generally improved, and has improved himself, can be called quite uneducated as to anything. I don't particularly favour mysteries. I would as soon on a fair and clear explanation be judged by one class of man as another, provided he had the qualification I have named." "At all events," said Clenham, "this sounds as if we were exchanging compliments, but we know we are not. I shall have the advantage of as plain an explanation as can be given." "Well," said Daniel, in his steady, even way, "I'll try to make it so." He had the power, often to be found in union with such a character, of explaining what he himself perceived and meant, with the direct force and distinctness with which it struck his own mind. His manner of demonstration was so orderly and neat and simple, that it was not easy to mistake him. There was something almost ludicrous in the complete irreconcilability of the vague conventional notion that he must be a visionary man, with the precise, sagacious travelling of his eye and thumb over the plans, their patient stoppages at particular points, their careful returns to other points, whence little channels of explanation had to be traced up, and his steady manner of making everything good and everything sound at each important stage, before taking his hearer on a line's breadth farther. His dismissal of himself from his description was hardly less remarkable. He never said, "I discovered this adaptation or invented that combination," but showed the whole thing as if the divine artificer had made it, and he had happened to find it. So modest he was about it, such a pleasant touch of respect was mingled with his quiet admiration of it, and so calmly convinced he was, that it was established on irrefragable laws. Not only that evening, but for several succeeding evenings, Clennam was quite charmed by this investigation. The more he pursued it, and the oftener he glanced at the grey head bending over it, and the shrewd eye kindling with pleasure in it and love of it, instrument for probing his heart though it had been made for 12 long years, the less he could reconcile it to his younger energy to let it go without one effort more. At length he said, "Doyce, it came to this at last, that the business was to be sunk with heaven knows how many more wrecks, or begun all over again?" "Yes," returned Doyce, "that's what the noblemen and gentlemen made of it after a dozen years." "And pretty fellows too," said Clennam bitterly. "The usual thing," observed Doyce. "I must not make a martyr of myself, when I am one of so large a company." "Relinquish it, or begin it all over again," mused Clennam. "That was exactly the long and the short of it," said Doyce. "Then, my friend," cried Clennam, starting up and taking his work roughened hand, "it shall be begun all over again." Doyce looked alarmed, and replied in a hurry for him, "No, no, better put it by, far better put it by. It will be heard of one day. I can put it by. You forget, my good Clennam, I have put it by. It's all at an end." "Yes, Doyce," returned Clennam, "at an end as far as your efforts and rebuffs are concerned, I admit, but not as far as mine are. I am younger than you. I have only once set foot in that precious office, and I am fresh game for them. Come, I'll try them. You shall do exactly as you have been doing since we have been together. I will add, as I easily can, to what I have been doing, the attempt to get public justice done to you. And unless I have some success to report, you shall hear no more of it." Daniel Doyce was still reluctant to consent, and again urged that they had better put it by. But it was natural that he should gradually allow himself to be over-persuaded by Clennam, and should yield. Yield he did. So Arthur resumed the long and hopeless labour of striving to make way with the Circumlocution Office. The waiting rooms of that department soon began to be familiar with his presence, and he was generally ushered into them by its janitors, much as a pickpocket might be shown into a police office. The principal difference being that the object of the latter class of public business is to keep the pickpocket, while the Circumlocution object was to get rid of Clennam. However, he was resolved to stick to the great department, and so the work of form-filling, corresponding, minuting, memorandum-making, signing, countersigning, countersigning, referring backwards and forwards, and referring sideways, crosswise, and zigzag, recommenced. Here arises a feature of the Circumlocution Office not previously mentioned in the present record. When that admirable department got into trouble, and was, by some infuriated members of Parliament, whom the smaller barnacles almost suspected of labouring under diabolic possession, attacked on the merits of no individual case, but as an institution wholly abominable and bedlamite, then the noble or right honourable barnacle who represented it in the House would smite that member and cleave him asunder, with a statement of the quantity of business, or the prevention of business, done by the Circumlocution Office. Then would that noble or right honourable barnacle hold in his hand a paper containing a few figures, to which, with the permission of the House, he would entreat its attention. Then would the inferior barnacles exclaim, obeying orders, "Here, here, here," and "Read." Then would the noble or right honourable barnacle perceive, sir, from this little document, which he thought might carry conviction even to the perversest mind, derisive laughter and cheering from the Barnacle fry, that within the short compass of the last financial half-year, this much maligned department (cheers) had written and received 15,000 letters. Loud cheers had written 24,000 minutes. Louder cheers, and 32,517 memoranda. Vehement cheering. Nay, an ingenious gentleman connected with the department, and himself a valuable public servant, had done him the favour to make a curious calculation of the amount of stationery consumed in it during the same period. It formed a part of this same short document, and he derived from it the remarkable fact that the sheets of foolscap paper it had devoted to the public service would pave the footways on both sides of Oxford Street from end to end, and leave nearly a quarter of a mile to spare for the park. Immense cheering and laughter, while of red tape it had used enough to stretch in graceful festoons from Hyde Park Corner to the General Post Office. Then, amidst a burst of official exultation, would the noble or right honourable Barnacle sit down, leaving the mutilated fragments of the member on the field. No one, after that exemplary demolition of him, would have the hardihood to hint that the more the Circumlocution Office did, the less was done, and that the greatest blessing it could confer on an unhappy public would be to do nothing. With sufficient occupation on his hands, now that he had this additional task, such a task had many and many a serviceable man died of before his day, Arthur Clennam led a life of slight variety. Regular visits to his mother's dull sick room, and visits scarcely less regular to Mr. Meagles at Twickenham, were its only changes during many months. He sadly and sorely missed little Dorrit. He had been prepared to miss her very much, but not so much. He knew to the full extent only through experience what a large place in his life was left blank when her familiar little figure went out of it. He felt, too, that he must relinquish the hope of its return, understanding the family character sufficiently well to be assured that he and she were divided by a broad ground of separation. The old interest he had had in her, and her old trusting reliance on him, were tinged with melancholy in his mind. So soon had change stolen over them, and so soon had they glided into the past with other secret tendernesses. When he received her letter, he was greatly moved, but did not the less sensibly feel that she was far divided from him by more than distance. It helped him to a clearer and keener perception of the place assigned him by the family. He saw that he was cherished in her grateful remembrance secretly, and that they resented him with the jail and the rest of its belongings. Through all these meditations which every day of his life crowded about her, he thought of her otherwise in the old way. She was his innocent friend, his delicate child, his dear little Dorrit. This very change of circumstances fitted curiously in with the habit, begun on the night when the roses floated away, of considering himself as a much older man than his years really made him. He regarded her from a point of view which in its remoteness, tender as it was, he little thought would have been unspeakable agony to her. He speculated about her future destiny, and about the husband she might have, with an affection for her which would have drained her heart of its dearest drop of hope, and broken it. Everything about him tended to confirm him in the custom of looking on himself as an elderly man, from whom such aspirations as he had combated in the case of Minnie Gowan, though that was not so long ago either, reckoning by months and seasons, were finally departed. His relations with her father and mother were like those on which a widower's son-in-law might have stood. If the twin sister who was dead had lived to pass away in the bloom of womanhood, and he had been her husband, the nature of his intercourse with Mr. and Mrs. Meagles would probably have been just what it was. This imperceptibly helped to render habitual the impression within him that he had done with, and dismissed that part of life. He invariably heard of Minnie from them, as telling them in her letters how happy she was, and how she loved her husband, but inseparable from that subject, he invariably saw the old cloud on Mr. Meagles's face. Mr. Meagles had never been quite so radiant since the marriage as before. He had never quite recovered the separation from Pet. He was the same good-humoured, open creature, but as if his face, from being much turned towards the pictures of his two children, which could show him only one look, unconsciously adopted a characteristic from them, it always had now, through all its changes of expression, a look of loss in it. One wintry Saturday, when Clennam was at the cottage, the dowager Mrs. Gowan drove up, in the Hampton Court equipage, which pretended to be the exclusive equipage of so many individual proprietors. She descended, in her shady ambuscade of green fan, to favour Mr. and Mrs. Meagles with a call. "And how do you both do, Papa and Mamma Meagles?" said she, encouraging her humble connections. "And when did you last hear from or about my poor fellow?" My poor fellow was her son, and this mode of speaking of him politely kept alive, without any offence in the world, the pretence that he had fallen a victim to the Meagles' wiles. "And the dear pretty one?" said Mrs. Gowan. "Have you later news of her than I have?" Which also delicately implied that her son had been captured by mere beauty, and under its fascination had foregone all sorts of worldly advantages. "I am sure," said Mrs. Gowan, without straining her attention on the answers she received, "it's an unspeakable comfort to know they continue happy. My poor fellow is of such a restless disposition, and has been so used to roving about, and to being inconstant and popular among all manner of people, that it's the greatest comfort in life. I suppose they're as poor as mice, Papa Meagles?" Mr. Meagles, fidgety under the question, replied, "I hope not, ma'am. I hope they will manage their little income." "Oh, my dearest Meagles," returned the lady, tapping him on the arm with the green fan, and then adroitly interposing it between a yawn and the company, "how can you, as a man of the world and one of the most businesslike of human beings, for you know you are businesslike, and a great deal too much for us who are not," which went to the former purpose by making Mr. Meagles out to be an artful schemer, "how can you talk about their managing their little means? My poor dear fellow, the idea of his managing hundreds, and the sweet pretty creature too, the notion of her managing, Papa Meagles, don't." "Well, ma'am," said Mr. Meagles gravely, "I am sorry to admit then that Henry certainly does anticipate his means." "My dear good man, I use no ceremony with you because we are a kind of relations. Positively, Mamma Meagles," exclaimed Mrs. Gowan cheerfully, as if the absurd coincidence then flashed upon her for the first time. "A kind of relations, my dear good man. In this world none of us can have everything our own way." This again went to the former point, and showed Mr. Meagles with all good breeding that, so far, he had been brilliantly successful in his deep designs. Mrs. Gowan thought the hit so good a one that she dwelt upon it, repeating, "Not everything, no, no. In this world we must not expect everything, Papa Meagles." "And may I ask, ma'am," retorted Mr. Meagles, a little heightened in colour, "who does expect everything?" "Oh, nobody, nobody," said Mrs. Gowan. "I was going to say, but you put me out. You interrupting, Papa. What was I going to say?" Drooping her large green fan, she looked musingly at Mr. Meagles while she thought about it, a performance not tending to the cooling of that gentleman's rather heated spirits. "Ah, yes, to be sure," said Mrs. Gowan. "You must remember that my poor fellow has always been accustomed to expectations. They may have been realized, or they may not have been realized." "Let us say, then, may not have been realized," observed Mr. Meagles. The dowager for a moment gave him an angry look, but tossed it off with her head and her fan, and pursued the tenor of her way in her former manner. "It makes no difference. My poor fellow has been accustomed to that sort of thing, and of course you knew it, and were prepared for the consequences. I myself always clearly foresaw the consequences, and am not surprised, and you must not be surprised. In fact, can be surprised. must have been prepared for it." Mr. Meagles looked at his wife and at Clennam, bit his lip, and coughed. "And now here's my poor fellow," Mrs. Gowan pursued, "receiving notice that he is to hold himself in expectation of a baby, and all the expenses attendant on such an addition to his family. Poor Henry! But it can't be helped now. It's too late to help it now. Only don't talk of anticipating means, Papa Meagles, as a discovery, because that would be too much." "Too much, ma'am?" said Mr. Meagles, as seeking an explanation. "There, there," said Mrs. Gowan, putting him in his inferior place with an expressive action of her hand. "Too much for my poor fellow's mother to bear at this time of day. They're fast married, and can't be unmarried. There, there, I know that. You needn't tell me that, Papa Meagles. I know it very well. What was it I said just now? That it was a great comfort they continued happy. It is to be hoped they will still continue happy. It is to be hoped pretty one will do everything she can to make my poor fellow happy, and keep him contented. Papa and Mamma Meagles, we had better say no more about it. We never did look at this subject from the same side, and we never shall. There, there, now I am good." Truly, having by this time said everything she could say in maintenance of her wonderfully mythical position, and in admonition to Mr. Meagles that he must not expect to bear his honours of alliance too cheaply, Mrs. Gowan was disposed to forego the rest. If Mr. Meagles had submitted to a glance of entreaty from Mrs. Meagles, and an expressive gesture from Clennam, he would have left her in the undisturbed enjoyment of this state of mind. But Pet was the darling and pride of his heart, and if he could ever have championed her more devotedly, or loved her better than in the days when she was the sunlight of his house, it would have been now, when, as its daily grace and delight, she was lost to it. "Mrs. Gowan, ma'am," said Mr. Meagles, "I have been a plain man all my life. If I was to try, no matter whether on myself, on somebody else, or both, any genteel mystifications, I should probably not succeed in them." "Papa Meagles," returned the dowager with an affable smile, but with the bloom on her cheeks standing out a little more vividly than usual as the neighbouring surface became paler, "probably not." "Therefore, my good madam," said Mr. Meagles, at great pains to restrain himself, "I hope I may, without offence, ask to have no such mystification played off upon me." "Mamma Meagles," observed Mrs. Gowan, "your good man is incomprehensible." Her turning to that worthy lady was an artifice to bring her into the discussion, quarrel with her, and vanquish her. Mr. Meagles interposed to prevent that consummation. "Mother," said he, "you're an inexpert, my dear, and it is not a fair match. Let me beg of you to remain quiet. Come, Mrs. Gowan, come. Let us try to be sensible. Let us try to be good-natured. Let us try to be fair. Don't you pity Henry, and I won't pity Pet. And don't be one-sided, my dear madam. It's not considerate, it's not kind. Don't let us say that we hope Pet will make Henry happy, or even that we hope Henry will make Pet happy." Mr. Meagles himself did not look happy as he spoke the words. "But let us hope they will make each other happy." "Yes, sure, and there leave it, father," said Mrs. Meagles, the kind-hearted and comfortable. "Why, mother, no," returned Mr. Meagles, "not exactly there. I can't quite leave it there. I must say just half a dozen words more. Mrs. Gowan, I hope I am not over-sensitive. I believe I don't look it." "Indeed you do not," said Mrs. Gowan, shaking her head and the great green fan together, for emphasis. "Thank you, ma'am. That's well. Notwithstanding which, I feel a little, I don't want to use a strong word, now shall I say hurt?" asked Mr. Meagles at once with frankness and moderation, and with a conciliatory appeal in his tone. "Say what you like," answered Mrs. Gowan. "It is perfectly indifferent to me." "No, no, don't say that," urged Mr. Meagles, "because that's not responding amiably. I feel a little hurt when I hear references made to consequences having been foreseen, and to its being too late now, and so forth." "Do you, Papa Meagles?" said Mrs. Gowan. I am not surprised.
Well, ma'am, reasoned Mr. Meagles, I was in hopes you would have been at least surprised, because to hurt me wilfully on so tender a subject is surely not generous.
I am not responsible, said Mrs. Gowan, for your conscience, you know.
Poor Mr. Meagles looked aghast with astonishment.
If I am unluckily obliged to carry a cap about with me, which is yours, and fits you, pursued Mrs. Gowan, don't blame me for its pattern, Papa Meagles, I beg.
Why, good Lord, ma'am, Mr. Meagles broke out, that's as much as to state.
Now, Papa Meagles, said Mrs. Gowan,
who became extremely deliberate and prepossessing in manner whenever that gentleman became at all warm.
Perhaps to prevent confusion, I had better speak for myself than trouble your kindness to speak for me. It's as much as to state you begin. If you please, I will finish the sentence. It is as much as to state, not that I wish to press it or even recall it, for it is of no use now, and my only wish is to make the best of existing circumstances, that from the first to the last I always objected to this match of yours, and at a very late period yielded a most unwilling consent to it.
Mother, cried Mr. Meagles, do you hear this? Arthur, do you hear this?
The room being of a convenient size, said Mrs. Gowan, looking about as she fanned herself, and quite charmingly adapted in all respects to conversation, I should imagine I am audible in any part of it.
Some moments passed in silence before Mr. Meagles could hold himself in his chair, with sufficient security to prevent his breaking out of it at the next word he spoke. At last he said, "Ma'am, I am very unwilling to revive them, but I must remind you what my opinions and my course were all along on that unfortunate subject."
"Oh, my dear sir," said Mrs. Gowan, smiling and shaking her head with accusatory intelligence, "they were well understood by me, I assure you."
"I never, ma'am," said Mr. Meagles, "knew unhappiness before that time. I never knew anxiety before that time. It was a time of such distress to me that Mr. Meagles could really say no more about it, in short, but passed his handkerchief before his face.
"I understood the whole affair," said Mrs. Gowan, composedly looking over her fan. "As you have appealed to Mr. Clennam, I may appeal to Mr. Clennam too. He knows whether I did or not."
"I am very unwilling," said Clennam, looked to by all parties, "to take any share in this discussion, more especially because I wish to preserve the best understanding and the clearest relations with Mr. Henry Gowan. I have very strong reasons indeed for entertaining that wish. Mrs. Gowan attributed certain views of furthering the marriage to my friend here, in conversation with me before it took place, and I endeavoured to undeceive her. I represented that I knew him, as I did and do, to be strenuously opposed to it, both in opinion and action.
You see,"
said Mrs. Gowan, turning the palms of her hands towards Mr. Meagles, as if she were justice herself, representing to him that he had better confess, for he had got not a leg to stand on.
"You see? Very good. Now, Papa and Mamma Meagles both," here she rose, "allow me to take the liberty of putting an end to this rather formidable controversy. I will not say another word upon its merits. I will only say that it is an additional proof of what one knows from all experience, that this kind of thing never answers, as my poor fellow himself would say, that it never pays, in one word, that it never does."
Mr. Meagles asked, "What kind of thing?"
"It is in vain," said Mrs. Gowan, "for people to attempt to get on together who have such extremely different antecedents, who are jumbled against each other in this accidental, matrimonial sort of way, and who cannot look at the untoward circumstance which has shaken them together in the same light. It never does."
Mr. Meagles was beginning. "Permit me to say, ma'am—"
"No, I don't," returned Mrs. Gowan. "Why should you? It is an ascertained fact. It never does. I will therefore, if you please, go my way, leaving you to yours. I shall at all times be happy to receive my poor fellow's pretty wife, and I shall always make a point of being on the most affectionate terms with her, But as to these terms, semi-family and semi-stranger, semi-goring and semi-boring, they form a state of things quite amusing in its impracticability. I assure you it never does." The dowager here made a smiling obeisance, rather to the room than to any one in it, and therewith took a final farewell of Papa and Mamma Meagles. Clennam stepped forward to hand her to the pill-box, which was at the service of all the pills in Hampton Court Palace, and she got into that vehicle with distinguished serenity, and was driven away. Thenceforth the dowager, with a light and careless humour, often recounted to her particular acquaintance how, after a hard trial, she had found it impossible to know those people who belonged to Henry's wife, and who had made that desperate set to catch him; whether she had come to the conclusion beforehand that to get rid of them would give her favourite pretence a better air, might save her some occasional inconvenience, and could risk no loss, the pretty creature being fast married, and her father devoted to her, was best known to herself; though this history has its opinion on that point too, and decidedly in the affirmative. End of chapter the 8th, book the 2nd of Little Dorrit. This recording is in the public domain. Book the 2nd, chapter the 9th of Little Dorrit. Read for LibriVox.org by Alice Christoph. Little Dorrit by Charles Dickens. Book the 2nd, chapter the 9th. Appearance and disappearance. "Arthur, my dear boy," said Mr. Meagles on the evening of the following day, "Mother and I have been talking this over, and we don't feel comfortable in remaining as we are. That elegant connection of ours, that dear lady who was here yesterday—" "I understand," said Arthur. "Even that affable and condescending ornament of society," pursued Mr. Meagles, "may misrepresent us, we are afraid. We could bear a great deal, Arthur, for her sake, but we think we would rather not bear that, if it was all the same to her." "Good," said Arthur. "Go on." "You see," proceeded Mr. Meagles, "it might put us wrong with our son-in-law, it might even put us wrong with our daughter, and it might lead to a great deal of domestic trouble. You see, don't you?" "Yes, indeed," returned Arthur. "There is much reason in what you say." He had glanced at Mrs. Meagles, who was always on the good and sensible side, and a petition had shone out of her honest face, that he would support Mr. Meagles in his present inclinings. "So, we are very much disposed, our mother and I," said Mr. Meagles, "to pack up bags and baggage and go among their Longers and Marshongers once more. I mean, we are very much disposed to be off, strike right through France into Italy, and see our pet." "And I don't think," replied Arthur, touched by the motherly anticipation in the bright face of Mrs. Meagles, "she must have been very like her daughter once, that you could do better. And if you ask me for my advice, it is that you set off to-morrow." "Is it really, though?" said Mr. Meagles. "Mother, this is being backed in an idea." Mother, with a look which thanked Clennam in a manner very agreeable to him, answered that it was indeed. "The fact is, besides, Arthur," said Mr. Meagles, the old cloud coming over his face, "that my son-in-law is already in debt again, and that I suppose I must clear him again. It may be as well, even on this account, that I should step over there and look him up in a friendly way. Then again, here's mother foolishly anxious, and yet naturally too, about Pet's state of health, and that she should not be left to feel lonesome at the present time. It's undeniably a long way off, Arthur, and a strange place for the poor love under all the circumstances. Let her be as well cared for as any lady in that land, still it is a long way off. Just as home is home, though it's never so homely. Why, you see," said Mr. Meagles, adding a new version to the proverb, "Rome is Rome, though it's never so Romely." "All perfectly true," observed Arthur, "and all sufficient reasons for going." "I am glad you think so. It decides me. Mother, my dear, you may get ready. We have lost our pleasant interpreter. She spoke 3 foreign languages beautifully, Arthur. You have heard her many a time, and you must pull me through it, mother, as well as you can." "I require a great deal of pulling through, Arthur," said Mr. Meagles, shaking his head. "A deal of pulling through. I stick at everything beyond a noun substantive, and I stick at him, if he's at all a tight one." "Now I think of it," returned Clennam, "there's Cavaletto. He shall go with you if you like. I could not afford to lose him, but you will bring him safe back." "Well, I am much obliged to you, my boy," said Mr. Meagles, turning it over, "but I think not. No, I think I'll be pulled through by mother. Cavaluro. I stick at this very name to start with, and it sounds like the chorus to a comic song, is so necessary to you that I don't like the thought of taking him away. More than that, there is no saying when we may come home again, and it would never do to take him away for an indefinite time. The cottage is not what it was. It only holds 2 little people less than it ever did. Pet and her poor unfortunate maid Tattycoram, but it seems empty now. Once out of it, there is no knowing when we may come back to it. No, Arthur, I'll be pulled through by mother." They would do best by themselves, perhaps, after all, Clennam thought, therefore did not press his proposal. "If you would come down and stay here for a change, when it wouldn't trouble you," Mr. Meagles resumed, "I should be glad to think, and so would mother too, I know, that you were brightening up the old place with a bit of life it was used to when it was full, and that the babies on the wall there had a kind eye upon them sometimes. You so belong to the spot and to them, Arthur, and we should every one of us have been so happy if it had fallen out. But let us see, how's the weather for travelling now?" Mr. Meagles broke off, cleared his throat, and got up to look out of the window. They agreed that the weather was of high promise, and Clennam kept the talk in that safe direction until it had become easy again, when he gently diverted it to Henry Gowan and his quick sense and agreeable qualities, when he was delicately dealt with. He likewise dwelt on the indisputable affection he entertained for his wife. Clennam did not fail of his effect upon good Mr. Meagles, whom these commendations greatly cheered, and who took mother to witness that the single and cordial desire of his heart in reference to their daughter's husband was harmoniously to exchange friendship for friendship, and confidence for confidence. Within a few hours the cottage furniture began to be wrapped up for preservation in the family absence, or, as Mr. Meagles expressed it, the house began to put its hair in papers, and within a few days father and mother were gone. Mrs. Tickit and Dr. Buchan were posted, as of yore, behind the parlour blind, and Arthur's solitary feet were rustling among the dry fallen leaves in the garden walks. As he had a liking for the spot, he seldom let a week pass without paying a visit. Sometimes he went down alone from Saturday to Monday. Sometimes his partner accompanied him. Sometimes he merely strolled for an hour or 2 about the house and garden, saw that all was right, and returned to London again. At all times, and under all circumstances, Mrs. Tickit, with her dark row of curls, and Dr. Buchan, sat in the parlour window, looking out for the family return. On one of his visits, Mrs. Tickit received him with the words, "I have something to tell you, Mr. Clennam, that will surprise you." So surprising was the something in question, that it actually brought Mrs. Tickit out of the parlour window, and produced her in the garden walk, when Clennam went in at the gate on its being opened for him. "What is it, Mrs. Tickit?" said he. "Sir," returned that faithful housekeeper, having taken him into the parlour and closed the door, "if ever I saw the led away and deluded child in my life, I saw her identically in the dusk of yesterday evening." "You don't mean Tatty?" "Coram, yes, I do," quoth Mrs. Tickit, clearing the disclosure at a leap. "Where?" "Mr. Clennam," returned Mrs. Tickit, "I was a little heavy in my eyes, being that I was waiting longer than customary for my cup of tea, which was then preparing by Mary Jane. I was not sleeping, nor what a person would term correctly dozing. I was more what a person would strictly call watching with my eyes closed." Without entering upon an inquiry into this curious abnormal condition, Clennam said, "Exactly. Well?" "Well, sir," proceeded Mrs. Tickit, "I was thinking of one thing and thinking of another, just as you yourself might, just as anybody might." "Precisely so," said Clennam. "Well?" "And when I do think of one thing and do think of another," pursued Mrs. Tickit, I hardly need to tell you, Mr. Clennam, that I think of the family, because, dear me, a person's thoughts—" Mrs. Tickit said this with an argumentative and philosophic air. "However they may stray, will go more or less on what is uppermost in their minds. They will do it, sir, and a person can't prevent them." Arthur subscribed to this discovery with a nod. "You find it so yourself, sir, I'll be bold to say," said Mrs. Tickit, "and we all find it so. It aren't our stations in life that changes us, Mr. Clennam. Thoughts is free. As I was saying, I was thinking of one thing and thinking of another, and thinking very much of the family. Not of the family in the present times only, but in the past times too. For when a person does begin thinking of one thing and thinking of another in that manner, as it's getting dark, what I say is, that all times seem to be present, and a person must get out of that state and consider before they can say which is which." He nodded again, afraid to utter a word, lest it should present any new opening to Mrs. Tickit's conversational powers. "In consequence of which," said Mrs. Tickit, "when I quivered my eyes and saw her actual form and figure looking in at the gate, I let them close again without so much as starting, for that actual form and figure came so pat to the time when it belonged to the house as much as mine or your own, that I never thought at the moment of its having gone away. But, sir, when I quivered my eyes again, I saw that it wasn't there. Then it all flooded upon me with a fright, and I jumped up." "You ran out directly," said Clennam. "I ran out," assented Mrs. Tickit, "as fast as ever my feet would carry me, and if you'll credit it, Mr. Clennam, there wasn't in the whole shining heavens, no, not so much as a finger of that young woman." Passing over the absence from the firmament of this novel constellation, Arthur inquired of Mrs. Tickit if she herself went beyond the gate. "Went to and fro, and high and low," said Mrs. Tickit, "and so no sign of her." He then asked Mrs. Tickit how long a space of time she supposed there might have been between the two sets of ocular quiverings she had experienced. Mrs. Tickit, though minutely circumstantial in her reply, had no settled opinion between 5 seconds and 10 minutes. She was so plainly at sea on this part of the case, and had so clearly been startled out of slumber, that Clennam was much disposed to regard the appearance as a dream. Without hurting Mrs. Tickit's feelings with that infidel solution of her mystery, he took it away from the cottage with him, and probably would have retained it ever afterwards if a circumstance had not soon happened to change his opinion. He was passing at nightfall along the Strand, and the lamplighter was going on before him, under whose hand the street lamps, blurred by the foggy air, burst out one after another, like so many blazing sunflowers coming into full blow all at once, when a stoppage on the pavement, caused by a train of coal waggons toiling up from the wharves at the river-side, brought him to a stand-still. He had been walking quickly, and going with some current of thought, and the sudden check given to both operations caused him to look freshly about him, as people under such circumstances usually do. Immediately, he saw in advance a few people intervening, but still so near to him that he could have touched them by stretching out his arm, Tattycoram, and a strange man of a remarkable appearance, a swaggering man with a high nose, and a black moustache as false in its colour as his eyes were false in their expression, who wore his heavy cloak with the air of a foreigner. His dress and general appearance were those of a man on travel, and he seemed to have very recently joined the girl. In bending down, being much taller than she was, listening to whatever she said to him, he looked over his shoulder with the suspicious glance of one who was not unused to be mistrustful that his footsteps might be dogged. It was then that Clennam saw his face. As his eyes lowered on the people behind him in the aggregate, without particularly resting upon Clennam's face, or any other, he had scarcely turned his head about again, and it was still bent down, listening to the girl, when the stoppage ceased, and the abstracted stream of people flowed on. Still bending his head and listening to the girl, he went on at her side, and Clennam followed them, resolving to play this unexpected play out, and see where they went. He had hardly made the determination, though he was not long about it, when he was again as suddenly brought up as he had been by the stoppage. They turned short into the Adelphi, the girl evidently leading, and went straight on, as if they were going to the terrace which overhangs the river. There is always, to this day, a sudden pause in that place to the roar of the great thoroughfare. The many sounds become so deadened that the change is like putting cotton in the ears, or having the head thickly muffled. At that time the contrast was far greater, there being no small steamboats on the river, no landing places but slippery wooden stairs and foot causeways, no railroad on the opposite bank, no hanging bridge or fish market near at hand, no traffic on the nearest bridge of stone, nothing moving on the stream but watermen's wherries and coal lighters. Long and broad black tiers of the latter, moored fast in the mud as if they were never to move again, made the shore funereal and silent after dark, and kept what little water movement there was far out toward midstream. At any hour later than sunset, and not least at that hour when most of the people who have anything to eat at home are going home to eat it, and when most of those who have nothing have hardly yet slunk out to beg or steal, it was a deserted place, and looked on a deserted scene. Such was the hour when Clennam stopped at the corner, observing the girl and the strange man as they went down the street. The man's footsteps were so noisy on the echoing stones that he was unwilling to add the sound of his own. But when they had passed the turning, and were in the darkness of the dark corner leading to the terrace, he made after them with such indifferent appearance of being a casual passenger on his way as he could assume. When he rounded the dark corner, they were walking along the terrace towards a figure which was coming towards them. If he had seen it by itself, under such conditions of gas lamp, mist, and distance, he might not have known it at first sight, but with the figure of the girl to prompt him, he at once recognized Miss Wade. He stopped at the corner, seeming to look back expectantly up the street, as if he had made an appointment with someone to meet him there, but he kept a careful eye on the three. When they came together, the man took off his hat, and made Miss Wade a bow. The girl appeared to say a few words as though she presented him, or accounted for his being late, or early, or what not, and then fell a pace or so behind, by herself. Miss Wade and the man then began to walk up and down, the man having the appearance of being extremely courteous and complimentary in manner, Miss Wade having the appearance of being extremely haughty. When they came down to the corner and turned, she was saying, "If I pinch myself for it, sir, that is my business. Confine yourself to yours, and ask me no question."
"By heaven, ma'am," he replied, making her another bow, "it was my profound respect for the strength of your character, and my admiration of your beauty."
"I want neither the one nor the other from any one," said she, "and certainly not from you of all creatures. Go on with your report."
"Am I pardoned?"
he asked with an air of half-abashed gallantry. "You are paid," she said, "and that is all you want." Whether the girl hung behind because she was not to hear the business, or as already knowing enough about it, Clennam could not determine. They turned, and she turned. She looked away at the river as she walked with her hands folded before her, and that was all he could make of her without showing his face. There happened, by good fortune, to be a lounger really waiting for someone, and he sometimes looked over the railing at the water, and sometimes came to the dark corner and looked up the street, rendering Arthur less conspicuous. When Miss Wade and the man came back again, she was saying, "You must wait until tomorrow."
"1,000 pardons," he returned. "My faith, then it's not convenient tonight?"
"No. I tell you I must get it before I can give it to you." She stopped in the roadway, as if to put an end to the conference. He of course stopped too, and the girl stopped.
"It's a little inconvenient," said the man. "A little, but holy blue, that's nothing in such a service. I am without money tonight, by chance. I have a good banker in this city, but I would not wish to draw upon the house until the time when I shall draw for a round sum."
"Harriet," said Miss Wade, "arrange with him, this gentleman here, for sending him some money tomorrow." She said it with a slur of the word gentleman which was more contemptuous than any emphasis, and walked slowly on. The man bent his head again, and the girl spoke to him as they both followed her. Clennam ventured to look at the girl as they moved away. He could note that her rich black eyes were fastened upon the man with a scrutinizing expression, and that she kept at a little distance from him, as they walked side by side to the further end of the terrace. A loud and altered clank upon the pavement warned him, before he could discern what was passing there, that the man was coming back alone. Clennam lounged into the road towards the railing, and the man passed at a quick swing, with the end of his cloak thrown over his shoulder, singing a scrap of a French song. The whole vista had no one in it now but himself. The lounger had lounged out of view, and Miss Wade and Tattycoram were gone. More than ever bent on seeing what became of them, and on having some information to give his good friend Mr. Meagles, he went out at the further end of the terrace, looking cautiously about him. He rightly judged that, at first at all events, they would go in a contrary direction from their late companion. He soon saw them in a neighbouring by-street, which was not a thoroughfare, evidently allowing time for the man to get well out of their way. They walked leisurely arm in arm down one side of the street, and returned on the opposite side. When they came back to the street corner, they changed their pace for the pace of people with an object and a distance before them, and walked steadily away. Clennam, no less steadily, kept them in sight. They crossed the Strand, and passed through Covent Garden, under the windows of his old lodging where dear little Dorrit had come that night, and slanted away north-east, until they passed the great building whence Tattycoram derived her name, and turned into the Gray's Inn Road. Clennam was quite at home here, in right of Flora, not to mention the Patriarch and Panks, and kept them in view with ease. He was beginning to wonder where they might be going next, when that wonder was lost in the greater wonder with which he saw them turn into the patriarchal street. That wonder was in its turn swallowed up on the greater wonder with which he saw them stop at the patriarchal door. A low double knock at the bright brass knocker, a gleam of light into the road from the open door, a brief pause for inquiry and answer, and the door was shut, and they were housed. After looking at the surrounding objects for assurance that he was not in an odd dream, and after pacing a little while before the house, Arthur knocked at the door. It was opened by the usual maidservant, and she showed him up at once, with her usual alacrity, to Flora's sitting-room. There was no one with Flora but Mr. F.'s aunt, which respectable gentlewoman, basking in a balmy atmosphere of tea and toast, was ensconced in an easy chair by the fireside, with a little table at her elbow, and a clean white handkerchief spread over her lap, on which 2 pieces of toast at that moment awaited consumption. Bending over a steaming vessel of tea, and looking through the steam, and breathing forth the steam, like a malignant Chinese enchantress engaged in the performance of unholy rites, Mr. F.'s aunt put down her great tea-cup and exclaimed, "Drat him if he ain't come back again!" It would seem from the foregoing exclamation that this uncompromising relative of the lamented Mr. F. measured time by the acuteness of her sensations, and not by the clock, supposed Clennam to have lately gone away, whereas at least a quarter of a year had elapsed since he had had the temerity to present himself before her. "My goodness, Arthur!" cried Flora, rising to give him a cordial reception. "Joyce and Clennam, what a start and a surprise, for though not far from the machinery and foundry business, and surely might be taken sometimes, if at no other time about midday, when a glass of sherry and a humble sandwich of whatever cold meat in the larder might not come amiss, nor taste the worse for being friendly, for you know you buy it somewhere, and wherever bought a profit must be made, or they would never keep the place. It stands to reason, without a motive, still never seen and learnt now not to be expected, for as Mr. F. himself said, if seeing is believing, not seeing is believing too, and when you don't see, you may fully believe you're not remembered. Not that I expect you, Arthur, Joyce and Clennam, to remember me. Why should I, for the days are gone? But bring another teacup here directly, and tell her fresh toast, and pray sit near the fire." Arthur was in the greatest anxiety to explain the object of his visit, but was put off for the moment, in spite of himself, by what he understood of the reproachful purport of these words, and by the genuine pleasure she testified in seeing him. "And now pray tell me something all you know," said Flora, drawing her chair near to his. about the good dear quiet little thing, and all the changes of her fortunes, carriage, people now, no doubt, and horses without number most romantic, a coat of arms, of course, and wild beasts on their hind legs, showing it as if it was a copy they had done with mouths from ear to ear, good gracious. And has she her health, which is the first consideration after all, for what is wealth without it? Mr. F. himself so often saying, when his strangers came, that 6pence a day, and find yourself and no gout so much preferable, not that he could have lived on anything like it, being the last man, or that the previous little thing, though far too familiar in expression now, had any tendency of that sort, much too slight and small, but looked so fragile, bless her. Mr. F. Sand, who had eaten a piece of toast down to the crust, here solemnly handed the crust to Flora, who ate it for her as a matter of business. Mr. F. Sand then moistened her 10 fingers in slow succession at her lips, and wiped them in exactly the same order on the white handkerchief. Then took the other piece of toast, and fell to work upon it. While pursuing this routine, she looked at Clennam with an expression of such intense severity that he felt obliged to look at her in return, against his personal inclinations. "She is in Italy with all her family, Flora," said, when the dreaded lady was occupied again. "In Italy, is she really?" said Flora. "With the grapes growing everywhere, and lava necklaces and bracelets too, that land of poetry, with burning mountains picturesque beyond belief, though if the organ boys come away from the neighbourhood, not to be scorched, nobody can wonder, being so young, and bringing their white mice with them, most humane. And is she really in that favoured land, with nothing but blue about her, and dying gladiators and belvederes, though Mr. F. himself did not believe, for his objection, when in spirits, was that the images could not be true, there being no medium between expensive quantities of linen badly got up, and all increases, and none whatever, which certainly does not seem probable, though perhaps in consequence of the extremes of rich and poor, which may account for it." Arthur tried to edge a word in, but Flora hurried on again. "Venice preserved too," said she. "I think you have been there. It is well or ill preserved, for people differ so, and macaroni, if they really eat it, like the conjurers, why not cut it shorter? You are acquainted, Arthur, dear Doyce and Clennam, at least not dear, and most assuredly not Doyce, for I have not the pleasure, but pray excuse me, acquainted, I believe, with Mantua. What has it got to do with Mantua? Making, for I never have been able to conceive." "I believe there is no connection, Flora, between the two," Arthur was beginning, when she caught him up again. "Upon your word, no, isn't there? I never did, but that's like me. I run away with an idea, and having none to spare, I keep it. Alas, there was a time, dear Arthur, that is to say, decidedly not dear, nor Arthur neither, but you understand me, when one bright idea gilded that what's his name, horizon of, etc., but it is darkly clouded now, and all is over." Arthur's increasing wish to speak of something very different was by this time so plainly written on his face, that Flora stopped in a tender look, and asked him what it was. "I have the greatest desire, Flora, to speak to someone who is now in this house, with Mr. Casby, no doubt, someone whom I saw coming, and who, in a misguided and deplorable way, has deserted the house of a friend of mine." "Papa sees so many and such old people," said Flora, rising, "that I shouldn't venture to go down for any one but you, Arthur. But for you I would willingly go down in a diving bell, much more a dining room, and will come back directly, if you will mind, and at the same time not mind Mr. F. Sand while I am gone." With those words and a parting glance, Flora bustled out, leaving Clennam under dreadful apprehension of this terrible charge. The first variation which manifested itself in Mr. F. Sand's demeanour, when she had finished her piece of toast, was a loud and prolonged sniff. Finding it impossible to avoid construing this demonstration into a defiance of himself, its gloomy significance being unmistakable, Clennam looked plaintively at the excellent, though prejudiced lady, from whom it emanated, in the hope that she might be disarmed by a meek submission. "None of your eyes at me," said Mr. F. Sand, shivering with hostility. "Take that." That was the crust of the piece of toast. Clennam accepted the boon with a look of gratitude, and held it in his hand under the pressure of a little embarrassment, which was not relieved when Mr. F. Sand, elevating her voice into a cry of considerable power, exclaimed, "He has a proud stomach, this chap! He's too proud a chap to eat it!" And coming out of her chair, shook her venerable fist so very close to his nose as to tickle the surface. But for the timely return of Flora, to find him in this difficult situation, further consequences might have ensued. Flora, without the least discomposure or surprise, but congratulating the old lady in an approving manner on being very lively to-night, handed her back to her chair. "He has a proud stomach, this chap," said Mr. F.'s relation on being reseated. "Give him a meal of chaff." "Oh, I don't think you would like that, aunt," returned Flora. "Give him a meal of chaff, I tell you," said Mr. F.'s aunt, glaring round Flora on her enemy. "It's the only thing for a proud stomach. Let him eat up every morsel. Drat him, give him a meal of chaff." Under a general pretence of helping him to this refreshment, Flora got him out on the staircase. Mr. F.'s aunt even then constantly reiterating, with inexpressible bitterness, that he was a chap, and had a proud stomach, and over again insisting on that equine provision being made for him, which she had already so strongly prescribed. "Such an inconvenient staircase, and so many corner stairs, Arthur," whispered Flora. "Would you object to putting your arm round me under my pelerine?" With a sense of going downstairs in a highly ridiculous manner, Clennam descended in the required attitude, and only released his fair burden at the dining-room door. Indeed, even there she was rather difficult to be got rid of, remaining in his embrace to murmur, "Arthur, for mercy's sake, don't breathe it to papa." She accompanied Arthur into the room where the patriarch sat alone, with his list shoes on the fender, twirling his thumbs as if he had never left off. The youthful patriarch, aged 10, looked out of his picture frame above him with no calmer air than he. Both smooth heads were alike beaming, blundering, and bumpy. "Mr. Clennam, I am glad to see you. I hope you are well, sir. I hope you are well. Please to sit down, please to sit down." "I had hoped, sir," said Clennam, doing so, and looking round with a face of blank disappointment, "not to find you alone." "Ah, indeed," said the patriarch sweetly. "Ah, indeed." "I told you so, you know, papa," cried Flora. "Ah, to be sure," returned the patriarch. "Yes, just so. Ah, to be sure." "Pray, sir," demanded Clennam anxiously, "is Miss Wade gone?" "Miss? Oh, you call her Wade," returned Mr. Casby. "Highly proper," Arthur quickly returned. "What do you call her?" "Wade," said Mr. Casby. "Oh, always Wade." After looking at the philanthropic visage and the long silky white hair for a few seconds, during which Mr. Casby twirled his thumbs, and smiled at the fire as if he were benevolently wishing it to burn him that he might forgive it, Arthur began. "I beg your pardon, Mr. Casby." "Not so, not so," said the patriarch. "Not so. But Miss Wade had an attendant with her, a young woman brought up by friends of mine, over whom her influence is not considered very salutary, and to whom I should be glad to have the opportunity of giving the assurance that she has not yet forfeited the interest of those protectors." "Really, really," returned the patriarch. "Will you therefore be so good as to give me the address of Miss Wade?" "Dear, dear, dear," said the patriarch, "how very unfortunate! If you had only sent in to me when they were here! I observed the young woman, Mr. Clennam, a fine full-coloured young woman, Mr. Clennam, with very dark hair and very dark eyes. If I mistake not, Arthur assented, and said once more with new expression, "If you would be so good as to give me the address." "Dear, dear, dear," exclaimed the patriarch in sweet regret. "Tut, tut, tut, what a pity, what a pity! I have no address, sir. Miss Wade mostly lives abroad, Mr. Clennam. She has done so for some years, and she is, if I may say so of a fellow creature and a lady, fitful and uncertain to a fault, Mr. Clennam. I may not see her again for a long, long time. I may never see her again. What a pity, what a pity!" Clennam saw now that he had as much hope of getting assistance out of the portrait as out of the patriarch, but he said nevertheless, "Mr. Casby, could you, for the satisfaction of the friends I have mentioned, and under any obligation of secrecy that you may consider it your duty to impose, give me any information at all touching Miss Wade? I have seen her abroad, and I have seen her at home, but I know nothing of her. Could you give me any account of her whatever?" "None," returned the patriarch, shaking his big head with his utmost benevolence. "None at all. Dear, dear, dear! What a real pity that she stayed so short a time, and you delayed. As confidential agency business, I have occasionally paid this lady money. But what satisfaction is it to you, sir, to know that?" "Truly none at all," said Clennam. "Truly," assented the patriarch with a shining face, as he philanthropically smiled at the fire. "None at all, sir. You hit the wise answer, Mr. Clennam. Truly none at all, sir." His turning of his smooth thumbs over one another as he sat there was so typical to Clennam of the way in which he would make the subject revolve if it were pursued, never showing any new part of it, nor allowing it to make the smallest advance, that it did much to help to convince him of his labour having been in vain. He might have taken any time to think about it, for Mr. Casby, well accustomed to get on anywhere by leaving everything to his bumps and his white hair, knew his strength to lie in silence. So there Casby sat, twirling, and making his polished head and forehead look largely benevolent in every knob. With this spectacle before him, Arthur had risen to go, when from the inner dock, where the good ship Banks was hove down when out in no cruising ground, the noise was heard of that steamer labouring towards him. It struck Arthur that the noise began demonstratively far off, as though Mr. Banks sought to impress on any one who might happen to think about it, that he was working on from out of hearing. Mr. Banks and he shook hands, and the former brought his employer a letter or two to sign. Mr. Banks, in shaking hands, merely scratched his eyebrow with his left forefinger, and snorted once, but Clennam, who understood him better now than of old, comprehended that he had almost done for the evening, and wished to say a word to him outside. Therefore, when he had taken his leave of Mr. Casby, and, which was a more difficult process, of Flora, he sauntered in the neighbourhood on Mr. Banks's line of road. He had waited but a short time when Mr. Banks appeared. Mr. Banks shaking hands again with another expressive snort, and taking off his hat to put his hair up, Arthur thought he received his cue to speak to him as one who knew pretty well what had just now passed. Therefore he said, without any preface, "I suppose they were really gone, Banks?" "Yes," replied Banks, "they were really gone." "Does he know where to find that lady?" "Can't say. I should think so." "Mr. Banks did not?" "No, Mr. Banks did not." "Did Mr. Banks know anything about her?" "I expect," rejoined that worthy, "I know as much about her as she knows about herself. She is somebody's child, anybody's, nobody's. Put her in a room in London here with any 6 people old enough to be her parents, and her parents may be there for anything she knows. They may be in any house she sees. They may be in any churchyard she passes. She may run against them in any street. She may make chance acquaintance of them at any time, and never know it. She knows nothing about them. She knows nothing about any relative whatever. Never did. Never will. Mr. Casby could enlighten her, perhaps." "Maybe," said Banks. "I expect so, but I don't know. He has long had money, not overmuch as I make out, in trust to dole out to her when she can't do without it. Sometimes she's proud and won't touch it for a length of time. Sometimes she's so poor that she must have it. She writhes under her life. A woman more angry, passionate, reckless, and revengeful never lived. She came for money to-night. Said she had peculiar occasion for it." "I think," observed Clennam musingly, "I by chance know what occasion. I mean, into whose pocket the money is to go." "Indeed?" said Banks. "If it's a compact, I recommend that party to be exact in it. I wouldn't trust myself to that woman, young and handsome as she is, if I had wronged her. No, not for twice my proprietor's money, unless—" Banks added as a saving clause, I had a lingering illness on me, and wanted to get it over. Arthur, hurriedly reviewing his own observation of her, found it to tally pretty nearly with Mr. Panks's view. "The wonder is to me," pursued Panks, "that she has never done for my proprietor, as the only person connected with her story she can lay hold of. Mentioning that, I may tell you between ourselves that I am sometimes tempted to do for him myself." Arthur started and said, "Dear me, Panks, don't say that." "Understand me," said Panks, extending 5 cropped coaly finger-nails on Arthur's arm. "I don't mean cut his throat, but by all that's precious, if he goes too far, I'll cut his hair." Having exhibited himself in the new light of enunciating this tremendous threat, Mr. Panks, with a countenance of grave import, snorted several times and steamed away. End of chapter the 9th, book the 2nd. This recording is in the public domain. Chapter the 10th, book the 2nd of Little Dorrit. Read for LibriVox.org by Alice Christoph. Little Dorrit by Charles Dickens. Book the 2nd. Chapter the 10th. The dreams of Mrs. Flintwinch thicken. The shady waiting rooms of the Circumlocution Office, where he passed a good deal of time in company with various troublesome convicts, who were under sentence to be broken alive on that wheel, had afforded Arthur Clennam ample leisure, in 3 or 4 successive days, to exhaust the subject of his late glimpse of Miss Wade and Tattycoram. He had been able to make no more of it, and no less of it, and in this unsatisfactory condition he was fain to leave it. During this space he had not been to his mother's dismal old house. One of his customary evenings for repairing thither now coming round, he left his dwelling and his partner at nearly 9 o'clock, and slowly walked in the direction of that grim home of his youth. It always affected his imagination as wrathful, mysterious, and sad, and his imagination was sufficiently impressible to see the whole neighbourhood under some tinge of its dark shadow. As he went along, upon a dreary night, the dim streets by which he went seemed all depositories of oppressive secrets. The deserted counting-houses, with their secrets of books and papers locked up in chests and safes; the banking-houses, with their secrets of strong rooms and wells, the keys of which were in a very few secret pockets and a very few secret breasts; the secrets of all the dispersed grinders in the vast mill, among whom there were doubtless blunderers, forgers, and trust-betrayers of many sorts, whom the light of any day that dawned might reveal. He could have fancied that these things, in hiding, imparted a heaviness to the air. The shadow thickening and thickening as he approached its source, he thought of the secrets of the lonely church vaults, where the people who had hoarded and secreted in iron coffers were in their turn similarly hoarded, not yet at rest from doing harm, and then of the secrets of the river, as it rolled its turbid tide between 2 frowning wildernesses of secrets, extending, thick and dense, for many miles, and warding off the free air and the free country swept by winds and wings of birds. The shadow still darkening as he drew near the house, the melancholy room which his father had once occupied, haunted by the appealing face he had himself seen fade away with him when there was no other watcher by the bed, arose before his mind. Its close air was secret. The gloom and must and dust of the whole tenement was secret. At the heart of it his mother presided, inflexible of face, indomitable of will, firmly holding all the secrets of her own and his father's life, and austerely opposing herself, front to front, to the great final secret of all life. He had turned into the narrow and steep street from which the court of enclosure wherein the house stood opened, when another footstep turned into it behind him, and so close upon his own that he was jostled to the wall. As his mind was steaming with these thoughts, the encounter took him altogether unprepared, so that the other passenger had had time to say boisterously, "Pardon, not my fault," and to pass on before the instant had elapsed, which was requisite to his recovery of the realities about him. When that moment had flashed away, he saw that the man striding on before him was the man who had been so much in his mind during the last few days. It was no casual resemblance, helped out by the force of the impression the man made upon him. It was the man he had followed in company with the girl, and whom he had overheard talking to Miss Wade. The street was a sharp descent, and was crooked too, and the man, who, although not drunk, had the air of being flushed with some strong drink, went down it so fast that Clennam lost him as he looked at him. With no defined intention of following him, but with an impulse to keep the figure in view a little longer, Clennam quickened his pace to pass the twist in the street, which hid him from his sight. On turning it, he saw the man no more. Standing now, close to the gateway of his mother's house, he looked down the street, but it was empty. There was no projecting shadow large enough to obscure the man. There was no turning near that he could have taken. Nor had there been any audible sound of the opening and closing of a door. Nevertheless, he concluded that the man must have had a key in his hand, and must have opened one of the many house doors and gone in. Ruminating on this strange chance and strange glimpse, he turned into the courtyard. As he looked, by mere habit, towards the feebly lighted windows of his mother's room, his eyes encountered the figure he had just lost, standing against the iron railings of the little waste enclosure, looking up at those windows and laughing to himself. Some of the many vagrant cats who were always prowling about there by night, and who had taken fright at him, appeared to have stopped when he had stopped, and were looking at him with eyes by no means unlike his own from tops of walls and porches and other safe points of pause. He had only halted for a moment to entertain himself thus. He immediately went forward, throwing the end of his cloak off his shoulder as he went, ascended the unevenly sunken steps, and knocked a sounding knock at the door. Clennam's surprise was not so absorbing but that he took his resolution without any incertitude. He went up to the door too, and ascended the steps too. His friend looked at him with a braggart air, and sang to himself, "Who passes by this road so late, compagnon de la Majolaine, who passes by this road so late, always gay." After which he knocked again. "You are impatient, sir," said Arthur. "I am, sir, death of my life, sir," returned the stranger. "It's my character to be impatient." The sound of Mistress Affery cautiously chaining the door before she opened it, caused them both to look that way. Affery opened it a very little, with a flaring candle in her hands, and asked who was that, at that time of night, with that knock. "Why, Arthur," she added with astonishment, seeing him first. "Not you sure? Ah, Lord save us! No," she cried out, seeing the other. "Him again?" "It's true, him again, dear Mrs. Flintwinch," cried the stranger. "Open the door, and let me take my dear friend Jeremiah to my arms. Open the door, and let me hasten myself to embrace my Flintwinch." "Is not at home," cried Affery. "Fetch him," cried the stranger. "Fetch my Flintwinch. Tell him that it is his old blondoir who comes from arriving in England. Tell him that it is his little boy who is here, his cabbage, his well-beloved. Open the door, beautiful Mrs. Flintwinch, and in the meantime let me to pass upstairs, to present my compliments, homage of blondoir to my lady. My lady lives always. It is well." "Open, then." To Arthur's increased surprise, Mistress Affery, stretching her eyes wide at himself, as if in warning that this was not a gentleman for him to interfere with, drew back the chain and opened the door. The stranger, without ceremony, walked into the hall, leaving Arthur to follow him. "Dispatch, then! Achieve, then! Bring my Flintwinch! Announce me to my lady!" cried the stranger, clanking about the stone floor. "Pray tell me, Affery," said Arthur aloud and sternly, as he surveyed him from head to foot with indignation. "Who is this gentleman?"
"Pray tell me, Affery," the stranger repeated in his turn. "Who is this gentleman?"
The voice of Mrs. Clennam opportunely called from her chamber above. "Affery, let them both come up. Arthur, come straight to me."
"Arthur?"
exclaimed Blundois, taking off his hat at arm's length, and bringing his heels together from a great stride and making him a flourishing bow.
"The son of my lady? I am the old devoted of the son of my lady."
Arthur looked at him again in no more flattering manner than before, and, turning on his heel without acknowledgment, went upstairs. The visitor followed him upstairs. Mistress Affery took the key from behind the door, and deftly slipped out to fetch her lord. A bystander, informed of the previous appearance of Monsieur Blundois in that room, would have observed a difference in Mrs. Clennam's present reception of him. Her face was not one to betray it, and her suppressed manner and her set voice were equally under her control. It wholly consisted in her never taking her eyes off his face from the moment of his entrance, and in her twice or thrice, when he was becoming noisy, swaying herself a very little forward in the chair in which she sat upright, with her hands immovable upon its elbows, as if she gave him the assurance that he should be presently heard at any length he would. Arthur did not fail to observe this, though the difference between the present occasion and the former was not within his power of observation.
"Madame," said Blundois, "do me the honour to present me to Monsieur, your son. It appears to me, madame, that Monsieur, your son, is disposed to complain of me. He is not polite."
"Sir," said Arthur, striking in expeditiously, "whoever you are, and however you come to be here, if I were the master of this house, I would lose no time in placing you on the outside of it." "But you are not," said his mother, without looking at him. "Unfortunately for the gratification of your unreasonable temper, you are not the master, Arthur." "I make no claim to be, mother. If I object to this person's manner of conducting himself here, and object to it so much, that if I had any authority here, I certainly would not suffer him to remain a minute, I object on your account." "In the case of objection being necessary," she returned, "I could object for myself, and of course I should." The subject of their dispute, who had seated himself, laughed aloud, and rapped his legs with his hand. "You have no right," said Mrs. Clennam, always intent on Blundois, however directly she addressed her son, "to speak to the prejudice of any gentleman, least of all a gentleman from another country, because he does not conform to your standard, or square his behaviour by your rules. It is possible that the gentleman may, on similar grounds, object to you." "I hope so," returned Arthur. "The gentleman," pursued Mrs. Clennam, "on a former occasion brought a letter of recommendation to us from highly esteemed and responsible correspondents. I am perfectly unacquainted with the gentleman's object in coming here at present. I am entirely ignorant of it, and cannot be supposed likely to be able to form the remotest guess at its nature." Her habitual frown became stronger, and she very slowly and weightily emphasized those words. "But when the gentleman proceeds to explain his object, as I shall beg him to have the goodness to do to myself and Flintwinch, when Flintwinch returns, it will prove, no doubt, to be one more or less in the usual way of our business, which it will be both our business and our pleasure to advance. It can be nothing else."
"We shall see, madame," said the man of business.
"We shall see," she assented. "The gentleman is acquainted with Flintwinch, and when the gentleman was in London last, I remember to have heard that he and Flintwinch had some entertainment or good fellowship together. I am not in the way of knowing much that passes outside this room, and the jungle of little worldly things beyond it does not much interest me, but I remember to have heard that."
"Right, madame. It is true."
He laughed again, and whistled the burden of the tune he had sung at the door. "Therefore, Arthur," said his mother, "the gentleman comes here as an acquaintance, and no stranger, and it is much to be regretted that your unreasonable temper should have found offence in him. I regret it. I say so to the gentleman. You will not say so, I know. Therefore I say it for myself and Flintwinch, since with us two the gentleman's business lies." The key of the door below was now heard in the lock, and the door was heard to open and close. In due sequence Mr. Flintwinch appeared, on whose entrance the visitor rose from his chair laughing loud, and folded him in a close embrace. "How goes it, my cherished friend?" said he. "How goes the world, my Flintwinch? Rose-coloured? So much the better, so much the better. Ah, but you look charming. Ah, but you look young and fresh as the flowers of spring. Ah, good little boy, brave child, brave child." While heaping these compliments on Mr. Flintwinch, he rolled him about with a hand on each of his shoulders, until the staggerings of that gentleman, who, under the circumstances, was drier and more twisted than ever, were like those of a teetotum nearly spent. "I had a presentiment last time that we should be better and more intimately acquainted. Is it coming on you, Flintwinch? Is it yet coming on?" "Why, no, sir," retorted Mr. Flintwinch. "Not unusually. Hadn't you better be seated? You have been calling for some more of that point, sir, I guess?" "Ah, little joker, little pig!" cried the visitor. "Ha, ha, 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 ha!" And throwing Mr. Flintwinch away as a closing piece of raillery, he sat down again. The amazement, suspicion, resentment, and shame, with which Arthur looked on at all this, struck him dumb. Mr. Flintwinch, who had spun backwards some 2 or 3 yards under the impetus last given to him, brought himself up with a face completely unchanged in its stolidity except as it was affected by shortness of breath, and looked hard at Arthur. Not a whit less reticent and wooden was Mr. Flintwinch outwardly than in the usual course of things, the only perceptible difference in him being that the knot of cravat which was generally under his ear had worked round to the back of his head, where it formed an ornamental appendage not unlike a bagwig, and gave him something of a courtly appearance. As Mrs. Clennam never removed her eyes from Blandois, on whom they had some effect, as a steady look had on a lower sort of dog, so Jeremiah never removed his from Arthur. It was as if they had tacitly agreed to take their different provinces. Thus, in the ensuing silence, Jeremiah stood scraping his chin and looking at Arthur, as though he were trying to screw his thoughts out of him with an instrument. After a little, the visitor, as if he felt the silence irksome, rose, and impatiently put himself with his back to the sacred fire which had burned through so many years. Thereupon Mrs. Clennam said, moving one of her hands for the first time, and moving it very slightly with an action of dismissal, "Please to leave us to our business, Arthur." "Mother, I do so with reluctance." "Never mind with what," she returned, "or with what not. Please to leave us. Come back at any other time when you may consider it a duty to bury half an hour wearily here. Good night." She held up her muffled fingers, that he might touch them with his, according to their usual custom, and he stood over her wheeled chair to touch her face with his lips. He thought, then, that her cheek was more strained than usual, and that it was colder. As he followed the direction of her eyes, in rising again, towards Mr. Flintwinch's good friend, Mr. Blandois snapped his finger and thumb with one loud contemptuous snap. "I leave your business acquaintance in my mother's room, Mr. Flintwinch," said Clennam, with a great deal of surprise and a great deal of unwillingness. The person referred to snapped his finger and thumb again. "Good night, mother." "Good night." "I had a friend once, my good comrade Flintwinch," said Blandois, standing astride before the fire, and so evidently saying it to arrest Clennam's retreating steps, that he lingered near the door. "I had a friend once who had heard so much of the dark side of this city and its ways, that he wouldn't have confided himself alone by night with 2 people who had an interest in getting him under the ground. My faith!
not even in a respectable house like this, unless he was bodily too strong for them. Bah! What a poltroon, my Flintwinch, eh?" "A cur, sir." "Agreed, a cur. But he wouldn't have done it, my Flintwinch, unless he had known them to have the will to silence him without the power. He wouldn't have drunk from a glass of water under such circumstances, not even in a respectable house like this, my Flintwinch, unless he had seen one of them drink first, and swallow too." Disdaining to speak, and indeed not very well able, for he was half choking, Clennam only glanced at the visitor as he passed out. The visitor saluted him with another parting snap, and his nose came down over his moustache, and his moustache went up under his nose, in an ominous and ugly smile. "For heaven's sake, Affery," whispered Clennam, as she opened the door for him in the dark hall, and he groped his way to the side of the night sky, "what is going on here?" Her own appearance was sufficiently ghastly, standing in the dark with her apron thrown over her head, and speaking behind it in a low, deadened voice. "Don't ask me anything, Arthur. I've been in a dream for ever so long. Go away." He went out, and she shut the door upon him. He looked up at the windows of his mother's room, and the dim light, deadened by the yellow blinds, seemed to say a response after Affery, and to mutter, "Don't ask me anything. Go away." End of chapter the 10th, book the 2nd of Little Dorrit. This recording is in the public domain. Chapter the 11th, book the 2nd of Little Dorrit. Read for LibriVox.org by Alice Christoph. Little Dorrit by Charles Dickens, book the 2nd, chapter the 11th. A letter from Little Dorrit. Dear Mr. Clennam, as I said in my last, that it was best for nobody to write to me, and as my sending you another little letter can therefore give you no other trouble than the trouble of reading it, perhaps you may not find leisure for even that, though I hope you will some day. I am now going to devote an hour to writing to you again. This time I write from Rome. We left Venice before Mr. and Mrs. Gowan did, but they were not so long upon the road as we were, and did not travel by the same way, and so when we arrived we found them in a lodging here, in a place called the Via Gregoriana. I dare say you know it. Now I am going to tell you all I can about them, because I know that is what you most want to hear. Theirs is not a very comfortable lodging, but perhaps I thought it less so when I first saw it than you would have done, because you have been in many different countries, and have seen many different customs. Of course it is a far, far better place, millions of times, than any I have ever been used to until lately, and I fancy I don't look at it with my own eyes, but with hers, for it would be easy to see that she has always been brought up in a tender and happy home, even if she had not told me so with great love for it. Well, it is a rather bare lodging up a rather dark common staircase, and it is nearly all a large dull room where Mr. Gowan paints. The windows are blocked up where any one could look out, and the walls have been all drawn over with chalk and charcoal by others who have lived there before, oh, I should think for years. There is a certain more dust-coloured than red which divides it, and the part behind the curtain makes the private sitting-room. When I first saw her there she was alone, and her work had fallen out of her hand, and she was looking up at the sky shining through the tops of the windows. Pray do not be uneasy when I tell you, but it was not quite so airy, not so bright, nor so cheerful, nor so happy and youthful altogether as I should have liked it to be. On account of Mr. Gowan's painting Papa's picture, which I am not quite convinced I should have known from the likeness if I had not seen him doing it, I have had more opportunities of being with her since then than I might have had without this fortunate chance. She is very much alone indeed. Shall I tell you about the second time I saw her? I went one day, when it happened that I should run round by myself, at 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. She was then dining alone,
and her solitary dinner had been brought in from somewhere, over a kind of brazier with a fire in it, and she had no company or prospect of company, that I could see, but the old man who had brought it. He was telling her a long story of robbers outside the walls being taken up by a stone statue of a saint to entertain her, as he said to me when I came out, because he had a daughter of his own, though she was not so pretty. I ought now to mention Mr. Gowan before I say what little more I have to say about her. He must admire her beauty, and he must be proud of her, for everybody praises it, and he must be fond of her, and I do not doubt that he is, but in his way. You know his way, and if it appears as careless and discontented in your eyes as it does in mine, I am not wrong in thinking that it might be better suited to her. If it does not seem so to you, I am quite sure I am wholly mistaken, for your unchanged poor child confides in your knowledge and goodness more than she could ever tell you if she was to try. But don't be frightened, I am not going to try. Owing, as I think, if you think so too, to Mr. Gowan's unsettled and dissatisfied way, he applies himself to his profession very little. He does nothing steadily or patiently, but equally takes things up and throws them down, and does them or leaves them undone, without caring about them. When I have heard him talking to Papa during the sittings for the picture, I have sat wondering whether it could be that he has no belief in anybody else, because he has no belief in himself. Is it so? I wonder what you will say when you come to this. I know how you will look, and I can almost hear the voice in which you would tell me on the iron bridge. Mr. Gowan goes out a good deal among what is considered the best company here, though he does not look as if he enjoyed it or liked it when he is with it. And she sometimes accompanies him, but lately she has gone out very little. I think I have noticed that they have an inconsistent way of speaking about her, as if she had made some great self-interested success in marrying Mr. Gowan, though, at the same time, the very same people would not have dreamed of taking him for themselves or their daughters. Then he goes into the country besides, to think about making sketches, and in all places where there are visitors, he has a large acquaintance and is very well known. Besides all this, he has a friend who is much in his society both at home and away from home, though he treats this friend very coolly, and is very uncertain in his behaviour to him. I am quite sure, because she has told me so, that she does not like this friend. He is so revolting to me too, that his being away from here at present is quite a relief to my mind, how much more to hers. But what I particularly want you to know, and why I have resolved to tell you so much, while I am afraid it may make you a little uncomfortable without occasion, is this. She is so true and so devoted, and knows so completely that all her love and duty are his forever, that you may be certain she will love him, admire him, praise him, and conceal all his faults until she dies. I believe she conceals them, and always will conceal them, even from herself. She has given him a heart that can never be taken back, and however much he may try it, he will never wear out its affection. You know the truth of this, as you know everything far, far better than I, but I cannot help telling you what a nature she shows, and that you can never think too well of her. I have not yet called her by her name in this letter, but we are such friends now that I do so when we are quietly together, and she speaks to me by my name, I mean, not my Christian name, but the name you gave me. When she began to call me Amy, I told her my short story, and that you had always called me Little Dorrit. I told her that the name was much dearer to me than any other, and so she calls me Little Dorrit too. Perhaps you have not heard from her father or mother yet, and may not know that she has a baby son. He was born only 2 days ago, and just a week after they came. It has made them very happy. However, I must tell you, as I am to tell you all, that I fancy they are under a constraint with Mr. Gowan, and that they feel as if his mocking way with them was sometimes a slight given to their love for her. It was but yesterday, when I was there, that I saw Mr. Meagles change colour, and get up and go out, as if he was afraid that he might say so, unless he prevented himself by that means. Yet I am sure they are both so considerate, good-humoured, and reasonable, that he might spare them. It is hard in him not to think of them a little more. I stopped at the last full stop to read all this over. It looked at first as if I was taking on myself to understand and explain so much, that I was half inclined not to send it. But when I thought it over a little, I felt more hopeful for your knowing at once that I had only been watchful for you, and had only noticed what I think I have noticed, because I was quickened by your interest in it. Indeed, you may be sure that is the truth. And now I have done with the subject in the present letter, and have little left to say. We are all quite well, and Fanny improves every day. You can hardly think how kind she is to me, and what pains she takes with me. She has a lover, who has followed her first all the way from Switzerland, and then all the way from Venice, and who has just confided to me that he means to follow her everywhere. I was much confused by his speaking to me about it, but he would. I did not know what to say, but at last I told him that I thought he had better not. For Fanny, but I did not tell him this, is much too spirited and clever to suit him. Still, he said he would, all the same. I have no lover, of course. If you should ever get so far as this in this long letter, you will perhaps say, surely little Dorrit will not leave off without telling me something about her travels, and surely it is time she did. I think it is indeed, but I don't know what to tell you. Since we left Venice we have been in a great many wonderful places, Genoa and Florence among them, and have seen so many wonderful sights that I am almost giddy when I think what a crowd they make. But you can tell me so much more about them than I can tell you, that why should I tire you with my accounts and descriptions? Dear Mr. Clennam, as I had the courage to tell you what the familiar difficulties in my travelling mind were before, I will not be a coward now. One of my frequent thoughts is this: old as these cities are, their age itself is hardly so curious to my reflections as that they should have been in their places all through those days when I did not even know of the existence of more than 2 or 3 of them, and when I scarcely knew of anything outside our old walls. There is something melancholy in it, and I don't know why. When we went to see the famous Leaning Tower at Pisa, it was a bright sunny day, and it and the buildings near it looked so old, and the earth and the sky looked so young, and its shadow on the ground was so soft and retired. I could not at first think how beautiful it was, or how curious, but I thought, oh, how many times when the shadow of the wall was falling on our room, and when that weary tread of feet was going up and down the yard, oh, how many times this place was just as quiet and lovely as it is to-day. It quite overpowered me. My heart was so full that tears burst out of my eyes, though I did what I could to restrain them, and I have the same feeling often. Do you know that since the change in our fortunes, though I appear to myself to have dreamed more than before, I have always dreamed of myself as very young indeed. I am not very old, you may say. No, but that is not what I mean. I have always dreamed of myself as a child learning to do needlework. I have often dreamed of myself as back there, seeing faces in the yard little known, and which I should have thought I had quite forgotten. But, as often as not, I have been abroad here, in Switzerland or France or Italy, somewhere where we have been, yet always as that little child. I have dreamed of going down to Mrs. General, with the patches on my clothes, in which I can first remember myself. I have over and over again dreamed of taking my place at dinner at Venice, when we have had a large company, in the mourning for my poor mother, which I wore when I was 8 years old, and wore long after it was threadbare and would mend no more. It has been a great distress to me to think how irreconcilable the company would consider it with my father's wealth, and how I should displease and disgrace him and Fanny and Edward by so plainly disclosing what they wished to keep secret. But I have not grown out of the little child in thinking of it, and, At the self-same moment I have dreamed that I have sat with the heartache at table, calculating the expense of the dinner, and quite distracting myself with thinking how they were ever to be made good. I have never dreamed of the change in our fortunes itself. I have never dreamed of your coming back with me that memorable morning to break it. I have never ever dreamed of you. Dear Mr. Clennam, it is possible that I have thought of you and others so much by day, that I have no thoughts left to wander round you by night. For I must now confess to you that I suffer from homesickness, that I long so ardently and earnestly for home, as sometimes, when no one sees me, to pine for it. I cannot bear to turn my face further away from it. My heart is a little lightened when we turn towards it, even for a few miles, and with the knowledge that we are soon to turn away again. So dearly do I love the scene of my poverty and your kindness. Oh, so dearly, oh, so dearly. Heaven knows when your poor child will see England again. We are all fond of the life here, except me, and there are no plans for our return. My dear father talks of a visit to London late in this next spring, on some affairs connected with the property, but I have no hope that he will bring me with him. I have tried to get on a little better under Mrs. General's instruction, and I hope I am not quite so dull as I used to be. I have begun to speak and understand almost easily the hard languages I told you about. I did not remember, at the moment when I wrote last, that you knew them both, but I remembered it afterwards, and it helped me on. God bless you, dear Mr. Clennam. Do not forget your ever grateful and affectionate little Dorrit. P.S. Particularly remember that Minnie Gowan deserves the best remembrance in which you can hold her. You cannot think too generously or too highly of her. I forgot Mr. Panks last time. Please, if you should see him, give him your little Dorrit's kind regard. He was very good to little D. End of chapter the 11th, book the 2nd of Little Dorrit. This recording is in the public domain. Chapter the 12th, book the 2nd of Little Dorrit. Read for LibriVox.org by Alice Christoph. Little Dorrit by Charles Dickens, book the 2nd, chapter the 12th, in which a great patriotic conference is holden. The famous name of Merdle became every day more famous in the land. Nobody knew that the Merdle of such high renown had ever done any good to any one, alive or dead, or to any earthly thing. Nobody knew that he had any capacity or utterance of any sort in him, which had ever thrown, for any creature, the feeblest farthing, candle-ray of light on any path of duty or diversion, pain or pleasure, toil or rest, fact or fancy, among the multiplicity of paths in the labyrinth trodden by the sons of Adam. Nobody had the smallest reason for supposing the clay of which this object of worship was made to be other than the commonest clay, with as clogged a wick smouldering inside of it as ever kept an image of humanity from tumbling to pieces. All people knew, or thought they knew, that he had made himself immensely rich, and for that reason alone prostrated themselves before him, more degradedly and less excusably than the darkest savage creeps out of his hole in the ground to propitiate, in some log or reptile, the deity of his benighted soul. Nay, the high priests of this worship had the man before them as a protest against their meanness. The multitude worshipped on trust, though always distinctly knowing why, but the officiators at the altar had the man habitually in their view. They sat at his feasts, and he sat at theirs. There was a spectre always attendant on him, saying to these high priests, "Are such the signs you trust, and love to honour? This head, these eyes, this mode of speech, the tone and manner of this man? You are the levers of the circumlocution office, and the rulers of men. When half a dozen of you fall out by the ears, it seems that Mother Earth can give birth to no other rulers. Does your qualification lie in the superior knowledge of men which accepts, courts and puffs this man? Or, if you are competent to judge aright the signs I never fail to show you when he appears among you, is your superior honesty your qualification? Two rather ugly questions these, always going about town with Mr. Merdle, and there was a tacit agreement that they must be stifled. In Mrs. Merdle's absence abroad, Mr. Merdle still kept the great house open for the passage through it of a stream of visitors. A few of these took affable possession of the establishment. 3 or 4 ladies of distinction and liveliness used to say to one another, "Let us dine at our dear Merdle's next Thursday. Whom shall we have?" Our dear Merdle would then receive his instructions, and would sit heavily among the company at table, and wander lumpishly about his drawing-rooms afterwards, only remarkable for appearing to have nothing to do with the entertainment beyond being in its way. The chief butler, the avenging spirit of this great man's life, relaxed nothing of his severity. He looked on at these dinners when the bosom was not there, as he looked on at other dinners when the bosom was there. And his eye was a basilisk to Mr. Merdle. He was a hard man, and would never bate an ounce of plate or a bottle of wine. He would not allow a dinner to be given, unless it was up to his mark. He set forth the table for his own dignity. If the guests chose to partake of what was served, he saw no objection, but it was served for the maintenance of his rank. As he stood by the sideboard, he seemed to announce, "I have accepted office to look at this which is now before me, and to look at nothing less than this." If he missed the presiding bosom, it was as a part of his own state of which he was, from unavoidable circumstances, temporarily deprived, just as he might have missed a centre-piece, or a choice wine-cooler, which had been sent to the bankers. Mr. Merdle issued invitations for a Barnacle dinner. Lord Decimus was to be there, Mr. Tite Barnacle was to be there, the pleasant young Barnacle was to be there, and the chorus of parliamentary Barnacles, who went about the provinces when the house was up, warbling the praises of their chief, were to be represented there. It was understood to be a great occasion. Mr. Merdle was going to take up the Barnacles. Some delicate little negotiations had occurred between him and the noble Decimus, the young Barnacle of engaging manners acting as negotiator, and Mr. Merdle had decided to cast the weight of his great probity and great riches into the Barnacle scale. Jobbery was suspected by the malicious. Perhaps because it was indisputable that if the adherents of the immortal enemy of mankind could have been secured by a job, the Barnacles would have jobbed him, for the good of the country, for the good of the country. Mrs. Merdle had written to this magnificent spouse of hers, whom it was heresy to regard as anything less than all the British merchants, since the days of Whittington rolled into one, and gilded 3 feet deep all over, had written to this spouse of hers several letters from Rome, in quick succession, urging upon him with importunity that now or never was the time to provide for Edmund Sparkler. Mrs. Merdle had shown him that the case of Edmund was urgent, and that infinite advantages might result from his having some good thing directly. In the grammar of Mrs. Merdle's verbs on this momentous subject, there was only one mood, the imperative, and that mood had only one tense, the present. Mrs. Merdle's verbs were so pressingly presented to Mr. Merdle to conjugate, that his sluggish blood and his long coat cuffs became quite agitated. In which state of agitation Mr. Merdle, evasively rolling his eyes round the chief butler's shoes without raising them to the index of that stupendous creature's thoughts, had signified to him his intention of giving a special dinner, not a very large dinner, but a very special dinner. The chief butler had signified in return that he had no objection to look on at the most expensive thing in that way that could be done, and the day of the dinner was now come. Mr. Merdle stood in one of his drawing-rooms with his back to the fire, waiting for the arrival of his important guests. He seldom or never took the liberty of standing with his back to the fire unless he was quite alone. In the presence of the chief butler, he could not have done such a deed. He would have clasped himself by the wrists in that constabulary manner of his, and have paced up and down the hearth-rug, or gone creeping about among the rich objects of furniture, if his oppressive retainer had appeared in the room at that very moment. The sly shadows which seemed to dart out of hiding when the fire rose, and to dart back into it when the fire fell, were sufficient witnesses of his making himself so easy. They were even more than sufficient, if his uncomfortable glances at them might be taken to mean anything. Mr. Merdle's right hand was filled with the evening paper, and the evening paper was full of Mr. Merdle. His wonderful enterprise, his wonderful wealth, his wonderful bank, were the fattening food of the evening paper that night. The wonderful bank, of which he was the chief projector, establisher, and manager, was the latest of the many Merdle wonders. So modest was Mr. Merdle withal, in the midst of these splendid achievements, that he looked far more like a man in possession of his house under a distraint, than a commercial colossus bestriding his own hearth-rug, while the little ships were sailing into dinner. Behold the vessels coming into port. The engaging young Barnacle was the first arrival, but Bar overtook him on the staircase. Bar, strengthened as usual with his double eye-glass and his little jury droop, was overjoyed to see the engaging young Barnacle, and opined that we were going to sit in banco, as we lawyers called it, to take a special argument. Indeed, said the sprightly young Barnacle, whose name was Ferdinand. How so? Nay, smiled Bar, if you don't know, how can I know? You are in the innermost sanctuary of the temple. I am one of the admiring concourse on the plain without. Bar could be light in hand or heavy in hand, according to the customer he had to deal with. With Ferdinand Barnacle he was gossamer. Bar was likewise always modest and self-depreciatory in his way. Bar was a man of great variety, but one leading thread ran through the woof of all his patterns. Every man with whom he had to do was in his eyes a juryman, and he must get that juryman over, if he could. Our illustrious host and friend, said Bar, our shining mercantile star, going into politics? Going? He has been in Parliament some time, you know, returned the engaging young Barnacle. True, said Bar, with his light comedy laugh for special jurymen, which was a very different thing from his low comedy laugh for comic tradesmen on common juries. He has been in Parliament for some time, yet hitherto our star has been a vacillating and wavering star. An average witness would have been seduced by the into an affirmative answer, but Ferdinand Barnacle looked knowingly at Bar as he strolled upstairs, and gave him no answer at all. Just so, said Bar, nodding his head, for he was not to be put off in that way. And therefore I spoke of our sitting in banco to take a special argument, meaning this to be a high and solemn occasion, when, as Captain Macheath says, the judges are met, a terrible show. We lawyers are sufficiently liberal, you see, to quote the captain, though the captain is severe upon us. Nevertheless, I think I could put in evidence an admission of the captain's, said Bar, with a little jocose roll of his head, for in his legal current of speech he always assumed the air of rallying himself with the best grace in the world. An admission of the captain's that law, in the gross, is at least intended to be impartial. For what says the captain, if I quote him correctly, and if not, with a light comedy touch of his double eye-glass on his companion's shoulder, my learned friend will set me right. Since laws were made for every degree, to curb vice in others as well as in me, I wonder we aren't better company upon Tyburn Tree. These words brought them to the drawing-room, where Mr. Merdle stood before the fire. So immensely astounded was Mr. Merdle by the entrance of Bar with such a reference in his mouth, that Bar explained himself to have been quoting Gay. Assuredly not one of our Westminster Hall authorities, said he, "but still no despicable one to a man possessing the largely practical Mr. Merdle's knowledge of the world." Mr. Merdle looked as if he thought he would say something, but subsequently looked as if he thought he wouldn't. The interval afforded time for Bishop to be announced. Bishop came in with meekness, and yet with a strong and rapid step, as if he wanted to get his 7-league dress shoes on, and go round the world to see that everybody was in a satisfactory state. Bishop had no idea that there was anything significant in the occasion. That was the most remarkable trait of his demeanour. He was crisp, fresh, cheerful, affable, bland, but so surprisingly innocent. Bar sidled up to prefer his politest inquiries in reference to the health of Mrs. Bishop. Mrs. Bishop had been a little unfortunate in the article of taking cold at a confirmation, but otherwise was well. Young Mr. Bishop was also well. He was down with his young wife and little family at his cure of souls. The representatives of the Barnacle chorus dropped in next, and Mr. Merdle's physician dropped in next. Bar, who had a bit of one eye and a bit of his double eye-glass for every one who came in at the door, no matter with whom he was conversing or what he was talking about, got among them all by some skilful means, without being seen to get at them, and touched each individual gentleman of the jury on his own individual favourite spot. With some of the chorus he laughed about the sleepy member who had gone out into the lobby the other night and voted the wrong way. With others he deplored that innovating spirit in the time which could not even be prevented from taking an unnatural interest in the public service and the public money. With the physician he had a word to say about the general health. He had also a little information to ask him for concerning a professional man of unquestioned erudition and polished manners. But those credentials in their highest development he believed were the possession of other professors of the healing art, jury droop, whom he had happened to have in the witness-box the day before yesterday, and from whom he had elicited in cross-examination that he claimed to be one of the exponents of this new mode of treatment, which appeared to Bar to, Bar thought so. Bar had thought, and hoped, physician would tell him so. Without presuming to decide where doctors disagreed, it did appear to Bar, viewing it as a question of common sense and not of so-called legal penetration, that this new system might be, in the presence of so great an authority, say humbug? Fortified by such encouragement, he could venture to say humbug, and now Bar's mind was relieved. Mr. Tite Barnacle, who, like Dr. Johnson's celebrated acquaintance, had only one idea in his head, and that was a wrong one, had appeared by this time. This eminent gentleman and Mr. Merdle, seated divers ways, and with ruminating aspects on a yellow ottoman in the light of the fire, holding no verbal communication with each other, bore a strong general resemblance to the 2 cows in the Cuyp picture over against them. But now Lord Decimus arrived, the chief butler, who up to this time had limited himself to a branch of his usual function by looking at the company as they entered, and that with more of defiance than favour, put himself so far out of his way as to come upstairs with him and announce him. Lord Decimus being an overpowering peer, a bashful young member of the lower house, who was the last fish but one caught by the Barnacles, and who had been invited on this occasion to commemorate his capture, shut his eyes when his lordship came in. Lord Decimus, nevertheless, was glad to see the member. He was also glad to see Mr. Merdle, glad to see Bishop, glad to see Bar, glad to see physician, glad to see Tite Barnacle, glad to see chorus, glad to see Ferdinand his private secretary. Lord Decimus, though one of the greatest of the earth, was not remarkable for ingratiatory manners, and Ferdinand had coached him up to the point of noticing all the fellows he might find there, and saying he was glad to see them. When he had achieved this rush of vivacity and condescension, his lordship composed himself into the picture after Cuyp, and made a 3rd cow in the group. Bar, who felt that he had got all the rest of the jury and must now lay hold of the foreman, soon came sidling up, double eye-glass in hand. Bar tendered the weather, as a subject neatly aloof from official reserve, for the foreman's consideration. Bar said that he was told, as everybody always is told, though who tells them and why will ever remain a mystery, that there was to be no wall fruit this year. Lord Decimus had not heard anything amiss of his peaches, but rather believed, if his people were correct, he was to have no apples. No apples? Bar was lost in astonishment and concern. It would have been all one to him in reality, if there had not been a pippin on the surface of the earth, but his show of interest in this apple question was positively painful. Now, to what Lord Decimus, for we troublesome lawyers loved to gather information and could never tell how useful it might prove to us, to what Lord Decimus was this to be attributed? Lord Decimus could not undertake to propound any theory about it. This might have stopped another man, but Bar, sticking to him fresh as ever, said, "As to pears now?" Long after Bar got made Attorney-General, this was told of him as a master-stroke. Lord Decimus had a reminiscence about a pear-tree, formerly growing in a garden near the back of his dame's house at Eton, upon which pear-tree the only joke of his life perennially bloomed. It was a joke of a compact and portable nature, turning on the difference between Eton pears and parliamentary pears. But it was a joke, a refined relish of which would seem to have appeared to Lord Decimus impossible to be had without a thorough and intimate acquaintance with the tree. Therefore, the story at first had no idea of such a tree, sir, then gradually found it in winter, carried it through the changing season, saw it bud, saw it blossom, saw it bear fruit, saw the fruit ripen, in short, cultivated the tree in that diligent and minute manner, before it got out of the bedroom window to steal the fruit, that many thanks had been offered up by belated listeners for the trees having been planted and grafted prior to Lord Decimus's time. Bar's interest in apples was so overtopped by the rapt suspense in which he pursued the changes of these pears, from the moment when Lord Decimus solemnly opened with, "Your mentioning pears recalls to my remembrance a pear-tree," down to the rich conclusion, "And so we pass, through the various changes of life, from Eton pears to parliamentary pears," that he had to go downstairs with Lord Decimus, and even then to be seated next to him at table in order that he might hear the anecdote out. By that time, Bar felt that he had secured the foreman, and might go to dinner with a good appetite. It was a dinner to provoke an appetite, though he had not had one. The rarest dishes, sumptuously cooked and sumptuously served, the choicest fruits, the most exquisite wines, marvels of workmanship in gold and silver, china and glass, innumerable things delicious to the senses of taste, smell, and sight, were insinuated into its composition. Oh, what a wonderful man this Merdle! What a great man! What a master man! How blessedly and enviably endowed! In one word, what a rich man! He took his usual poor 18-pennyworth of food in his usual indigestive way, and had as little to say for himself as even a wonderful man had. Fortunately, Lord Decimus was one of those sublimities who had no occasion to be talked to, for they can be at any time sufficiently occupied with the contemplation of their own greatness. This enabled the bashful young member to keep his eyes open long enough at a time to see his dinner, but, whenever Lord Decimus spoke, he shut them again. The agreeable young Barnacle and Bar were the talkers of the party. Bishop would have been exceedingly agreeable also, but that his innocence stood in his way. He was so soon left behind. When there was any little hint of anything being in the wind, he got lost directly. Worldly affairs were too much for him. He couldn't make them out at all. This was observable when Bar said, incidentally, that he was happy to have heard that we were soon to have the advantage of enlisting on the good side the sound and plain sagacity, not demonstrative or ostentatious, but thoroughly sound and practical, of our friend Mr. Sparkler. Ferdinand Barnacle laughed, and said, oh, yes, he believed so. A vote was a vote, and always acceptable. Bar was sorry to miss our good friend Mr. Sparkler to-day, Mr. Merdle. He is always with Mrs. Merdle, returned that gentleman, slowly coming out of a long abstraction, in the course of which he had been fitting a tablespoon up his sleeve. It is not indispensable for him to be on the spot. The magic name of Merdle, said Bar, with the jury droop, no doubt will suffice for all. Why, yes, I believe so, assented Mr. Merdle, putting his spoon aside and clumsily hiding each of his hands in the coat cuff of the other hand. I believe the people in my interest down there will not make any difficulty. Modal people, said Bar. I am glad you approve of them, said Mr. Merdle. And the people of those two places now, pursued Bar with a bright twinkle in his keen eye, as it slightly turned in the direction of his magnificent neighbour. We lawyers are always curious, always inquisitive, always picking up odds and ends for our patchwork minds, since there is no knowing when and where they may fit into some corner. The people of those other two places now? Do they yield so laudably to the vast and cumulative influence of such enterprise and such renown? Do those little rills become absorbed so quietly and easily, and, as it were by the influence of natural laws, so beautifully in the swoop of the majestic stream as it flows upon its wondrous way enriching the surrounding lands, that their course is perfectly to be calculated, and distinctly to be predicated? Mr. Merdle, a little troubled by Bar's eloquence, looked fitfully about the nearest salt-cellar for some moments, and then said, hesitating, They are perfectly aware, sir, of their duty to society. They will return anybody I send to them for that purpose. Cheering to know, said Bar, cheering to know. The three places in question were three little rotten holes in this island, containing three little ignorant, drunken, guzzling, dirty, out-of-the-way constituencies that had reeled into Mr. Merdle's pocket. Ferdinand Barnacle laughed in his easy way, and airily said they were a nice set of fellows. Bishop, mentally perambulating among paths of peace, was altogether swallowed up in absence of mind. Pray, asked Lord Decimus, casting his eyes around the table, what is this story I have heard of a gentleman long confined in a debtor's prison proving to be of a wealthy family, and having come into the inheritance of a large sum of money? I have met with a variety of allusions to it. Do you know anything of it, Ferdinand? I only know this much, said Ferdinand, that he was given the department with which I have the honour to be associated. This sparkling young Barnacle threw off the phrase sportively, as who should say, We know all about these forms of speech, but we must keep it up, we must keep the game alive. No end of trouble, and has put us into innumerable fixes. Fixes? Repeated Lord Decimus, with a majestic pausing and pondering on the word that made the bashful member shut his eyes quite tight. Fixes? A very perplexing business indeed, observed Mr. Tite Barnacle, with an air of grave resentment. What? Said Lord Decimus. Was the character of his business? What was the nature of these, fixes, Ferdinand? Oh, it's a good story as a story, returned that gentleman. As good a thing of its kind as need be. This Mr. Dorrit, his name is Dorrit, had incurred a responsibility to us ages before the fairy came out of the bank and gave him his fortune, under a bond he had signed for the performance of a contract which was not at all performed. He was a partner in a house in some large way, spirits or buttons or wine or blacking or oatmeal or woolen or pork or hooks and eyes or iron or treacle or shoes or something or other that was wanted for troops or seamen or somebody, and the house burst, and we being among the creditors, detainees were lodged on the part of the Crown in a scientific manner, and all the rest of it. When the fairy had appeared, and he wanted to pay us off, egad we had got into such an exemplary state of checking and counter-checking, signing and counter-signing, that it was 6 months before we knew how to take the money or how to give a receipt for it. It was a triumph of public business. said this handsome young barnacle, laughing heartily. "You never saw such a lot of forms in your life. Why, the attorney said to me one day, if I wanted this office to give me 2,000 or 3,000 pounds instead of take it, I couldn't have more trouble about it. 'You are right, old fellow,' I told him, 'and in future you'll know that we have something to do here.'" The pleasant young barnacle finished by once more laughing heartily. He was a very easy, pleasant fellow indeed, and his manners were exceedingly winning. Mr. Tite Barnacle's view of the business was of a less airy character. He took it ill that Mr. Dorrit had troubled the department by wanting to pay the money, and considered it a grossly informal thing to do after so many years. But Mr. Tite Barnacle was a buttoned-up man, and consequently a weighty one. All buttoned-up men are weighty. All buttoned-up men are believed in. Whether or no the reserved and never exercised power of unbuttoning fascinates mankind, whether or no wisdom is supposed to condense and augment when buttoned up, and to evaporate when unbuttoned, it is certain that the man to whom importance is accorded is the buttoned-up man. Mr. Tite Barnacle never would have passed for half his current value, unless his coat had been always buttoned up to his white cravat. "May I ask," said Lord Decimus, "if Mr. Dorrit or Dorrit has any family?" Nobody else replying, the host said, "He has 2 daughters, my lord." "Oh, you are acquainted with him?" asked Lord Decimus. "Mrs. Merdle is. Mr. Sparkler is too. In fact," said Mr. Merdle, "I rather believe that one of the young ladies has made an impression on Edmund Sparkler. He is susceptible, and, I think, the conquest." Here Mr. Merdle stopped, and looked at the tablecloth, as he usually did when he found himself observed or listened to. Bar was uncommonly pleased to find that the Merdle family and this family had already been brought into contact. He submitted in a low voice across the table to Bishop that it was a kind of analogical illustration of those physical laws, in virtue of which like flies to like. He regarded this power of attraction in wealth to draw wealth to it as something remarkably interesting and curious, something indefinably allied to the lodestone and gravitation. Bishop, who had ambled back to earth again when the present theme was broached, acquiesced. He said it was indeed highly important to society that one in the trying situation of unexpectedly finding himself invested with a power for good or for evil in society should become, as it were, merged in the superior power of a more legitimate and more gigantic growth, the influence of which, as in the case of our friend at whose board we sat, was habitually exercised in harmony with the best interests of society. Thus, instead of 2 rival and contending flames, a larger and a lesser, each burning with a lurid and uncertain glare, we had a blended and a softened light whose genial ray diffused an equable warmth throughout the land. Bishop seemed to like his own way of putting the case very much, and rather dwelt upon it. Bar, meanwhile, not to throw away a juryman, making a show of sitting at his feet and feeding on his precepts. The dinner and dessert being 3 hours long, the bashful member cooled in the shadow of Lord Decimus faster than he warmed with food and drink, and had but a chilly time of it. Lord Decimus, like a tall tower in a flat country, seemed to project himself across the tablecloth, hide the light from the honourable member, cool the honourable member's marrow, and give him a woeful idea of distance. When he asked this unfortunate traveller to take wine, he encompassed his faltering steps with the gloomiest of shades, and when he said, "Your health, sir," all around him was barrenness and desolation. At length Lord Decimus, with a coffee-cup in his hand, began to hover about among the pictures, and to cause an interesting speculation to arise in all minds as to the probabilities of his ceasing to hover, and enabling the smaller birds to flutter upstairs, which could not be done until he had urged his noble opinions in that direction. After some delay, and several stretches of his wings which came to nothing, he soared to the drawing-rooms. And here a difficulty arose, which always does arise when 2 people are specially brought together at a dinner to confer with one another. Everybody, except Bishop, who had no suspicion of it, knew perfectly well that this dinner had been eaten and drunk specifically to the end that Lord Decimus and Mr. Merdle should have 5 minutes' conversation together. The opportunity so elaborately prepared was now arrived, and it seemed from that moment that no mere human ingenuity could so much as get the two chieftains into the same room. Mr. Merdle and his noble guest persisted in prowling about at opposite ends of the perspective. It was in vain for the engaging Ferdinand to bring Lord Decimus to look at the bronze horses near Mr. Merdle. Then Mr. Merdle evaded, and wandered away. It was in vain for him to bring Mr. Merdle to Lord Decimus to tell him the history of the unique Dresden vases. Then Lord Decimus evaded and wandered away, while he was getting his man up to the mark. "Did you ever see such a thing as this?" said Ferdinand to Bar, when he had been baffled 20 times. "Often," returned Bar, "unless I butt one of them into an appointed corner, and you butt the other," said Ferdinand. "It will not come off after all." "Very good," said Bar. "I'll butt Merdle if you like, but not my lord." Ferdinand laughed in the midst of his vexation. "Confound them both," said he, looking at his watch. "I want to get away. Why the deuce can't they come together? They both know what they want and mean to do. Look at them." They were still looming at opposite ends of the perspective, each with an absurd pretence of not having the other on his mind, which could not have been more transparently ridiculous, though his real mind had been chalked on his back. Bishop, who had just now made a third with Bar and Ferdinand, but whose innocence had again cut him out of the subject and washed him in sweet oil, was seen to approach Lord Decimus and glide into conversation. "I must get Merdle's doctor to catch and secure him, I suppose," said Ferdinand, "and then I must lay hold of my illustrious kinsman, and decoy him if I can, drag him if I can't, to the conference." "Since you do me the honour," said Bar with his slyest smile, "to ask for my poor aid, it shall be yours with the greatest pleasure. I don't think this is to be done by one man. But if you will undertake to pen my lord into that furthest drawing-room where he is now so profoundly engaged, I will undertake to bring our dear Merdle into the presence, without the possibility of getting away." "Done," said Ferdinand. "Done," said Bar. Bar was a sight wondrous to behold, and full of matter, when, jauntily waving his double eyeglass by its ribbon, and jauntily drooping to an universe of jurymen, he, in the most accidental manner ever seen, found himself at Mr. Merdle's shoulder, and embraced that opportunity of mentioning a little point to him, on which he particularly wished to be guided by the light of his practical knowledge. Here he took Mr. Merdle's arm and walked him gently away. A banker, whom we would call A. B., advanced a considerable sum of money, which we would call £15,000, to a client or customer of his, whom he would call P. Q. Here, as they were getting towards Lord Decimus, he held Mr. Merdle tight, as a security for the repayment of his advance to P. Q., whom we would call a widow lady. There were placed in A. B.'s hands the title deeds of a freehold estate, which we would call Blinkitadoddles. Now, the point was this. A limited right of felling and lopping in the woods of Blinkitadoddles lay in the son of P. Q., then past his majority, and whom we would call X. Y., but really this was too bad, in the presence of Lord Decimus, to detain the host with chopping out dry chaff of law was really too bad. Another time. Bar was truly repentant, and would not say another syllable. Would Bishop favour him with 6 words? He had now set Mr. Merdle down on a couch, side by side with Lord Decimus, and to it they must go, now or never. And now the rest of the company, highly excited and interested, always excepting Bishop, who had not the slightest idea that anything was going on, formed in one group round the fire in the next drawing-room, and pretending to be chatting easily on the infinite variety of small topics, while everybody's thoughts and eyes were secretly straying towards the secluded pair. The chorus were excessively nervous, perhaps as labouring under the dreadful apprehension that some good thing was going to be diverted from them. Bishop alone talked steadily and evenly. He conversed with the great physician on that relaxation of the throat with which young curates were too frequently afflicted, and on the means of lessening the great prevalence of that disorder in the church. Physician, as a general rule, was of opinion that the best way to avoid it was to know how to read, before you made a profession of reading. Bishop said dubiously, did he really think so? And physician said, decidedly, yes, he did. Ferdinand, meanwhile, was the only one of the party who skirmished on the outside of the circle. He kept about midway between it and the two, as if some sort of surgical operation were being performed by Lord Decimus on Mr. Merdle, or by Mr. Merdle on Lord Decimus, and his services might at any moment be required as dresser. In fact, within a quarter of an hour Lord Decimus called to him, "Ferdinand," and he went, and took his place in the conference for some 5 minutes more. Then a half-suppressed gasp broke out among the chorus, for Lord Decimus rose to take his leave. Again coached up by Ferdinand to the point of making himself popular, he shook hands in the most brilliant manner with the whole company, and even said to Bar, "I hope you were not bored by my pears?" To which Bar retorted, "Eton, my lord, or parliamentary?" neatly showing that he had mastered the joke, and delicately insinuating that he could never forget it while his life remained. All the grave importance that was buttoned up in Mr. Tite-Barnacle took itself away next, and Ferdinand took himself away next to the opera. Some of the rest lingered a little, marrying golden liqueur glasses to ball tables with sticky rings, on the desperate chance of Mr. Merdle saying something, but Merdle, as usual, oozed sluggishly and muddily about his drawing-room, saying never a word. In a day or two it was announced to all the town that Edmund Sparkler, Esquire, son-in-law of the eminent Mr. Merdle of world-wide renown, was made one of the Lords of the Circumlocution Office, and proclamation was issued to all true believers that this admirable appointment was to be hailed as a graceful and gracious mark of homage rendered by the graceful and gracious Decimus to that commercial interest which must ever in a great commercial country, and all the rest of it with blast of trumpet. So, bolstered by this mark of government homage, the wonderful bank and all the other wonderful undertakings went on and went up, and gapers came to Harley Street, Cavendish Square, only to look at the house where the golden wonder lived. And when they saw the chief butler looking out at the hall door in his moments of condescension, the gapers said how rich he looked, and wondered how much money he had in the wonderful bank. But, if they had known that respectable Nemesis better, they would not have wondered about it, and might have stated the amount with the utmost precision. End of chapter the 12th, book the 2nd of Little Dorrit. This recording is in the public domain.